Have you ever wondered why some people can control your mood so easily? One message from them, and your whole day changes. One criticism, and suddenly you start doubting yourself. One rejection, and you feel like you are not enough. But Buddhism teaches a powerful truth. People only control the parts of you that you have not understood yet. When you do not know yourself, other people's opinions become your mirror. Their approval becomes your confidence. Their silence becomes your punishment. Their manipulation becomes your emotional prison. But the more deeply you understand your own mind, your fears, your wounds, and your worth, the less power anyone has over you. Because a person who knows themselves cannot be easily broken, controlled, or manipulated. 1. Most people can only control the version of you that is insecure. Manipulative people often look for insecurity, because insecurity makes people easier to control. When you constantly doubt yourself, you begin depending on other people to tell you who you are, what you should do, and how you should feel. A person who does not trust their own mind will always be emotionally influenced by the opinions of others. Buddhism teaches that suffering begins when you become disconnected from yourself. Instead of understanding your own thoughts, values, and emotions, you start building your identity around pleasing people. You become afraid of rejection, criticism, and judgment. Slowly, your happiness becomes controlled by how others treat you. This is why insecure people are easily manipulated. One negative comment can destroy their confidence. One rejection can make them feel worthless. One person's approval can completely change their mood. Their emotional state constantly depends on outside validation. But self-awareness changes this completely. The more you understand yourself, the less you need other people to define your value. You stop trying to prove yourself to everyone. You stop over-explaining your decisions. You stop changing your personality just to be accepted. Because deep down, you already know who you are. And once you truly know yourself, people lose the power to emotionally control you so easily. 2. A person who understands their emotions cannot be easily manipulated. Most people are controlled by emotions they do not fully understand. Fear controls their decisions. Loneliness controls their relationships. Anger controls their words. Attachment controls their peace. And because they never learned how to calmly observe their emotions, they react automatically to everything they feel. Instead of controlling their mind, their emotions begin controlling them. Buddhism teaches that emotions are temporary visitors, not permanent truths. A feeling may feel powerful in the moment, but it does not last forever. The problem is that most people immediately believe every emotion they feel. If they feel insecure, they suddenly believe they are not good enough. If they feel rejected, they think nobody loves them. If they feel anxious, they imagine something terrible is about to happen. They never stop to question the emotion before reacting to it. This lack of self-awareness gives other people enormous power over them. Manipulative people understand emotional weakness very well. They know how to trigger guilt, fear, jealousy, insecurity, or emotional dependence to control someone's behavior. They know that once your emotions become unstable, your thinking also becomes unstable. And when your mind is emotionally overwhelmed, it becomes easier for others to influence your decisions. 3. The need to be liked makes people lose themselves. One of the biggest reasons people become emotionally manipulated is because they are deeply afraid of rejection. They want everyone to like them, approve of them, and accept them. So instead of living honestly, they begin changing themselves to match what other people want. They hide their real thoughts, suppress their emotions, and slowly become disconnected from who they truly are. Buddhism teaches that attachment is one of the main causes of suffering. And one of the strongest attachments many people carry is the attachment to approval. They become emotionally addicted to being liked. Their peace depends on compliments, attention, validation, and acceptance from others. When people praise them, they feel valuable. When people reject them, they feel worthless. This creates a very dangerous way of living, because the moment your happiness depends on other people's opinions, your life is no longer fully yours. You begin making decisions based on fear instead of truth. You say yes when you want to say no. You stay silent when you want to speak. You tolerate disrespect because you are afraid of losing people. You pretend to be okay even when you are emotionally exhausted inside. Slowly, people stop seeing the real you because you stop showing the real you. Many people spend their entire lives performing for acceptance. They become different around different people. They constantly overthink how they are being perceived. They worry too much about disappointing others. And because of this, they lose touch with their own identity. Manipulative people can easily control someone who is desperate to be liked. They know guilt will work on them. They know fear of rejection will control them. They know emotional pressure will make them abandon themselves just to keep others happy. But self-awareness changes this completely. The more deeply you understand yourself, the less desperate you become for outside approval. You begin realizing that not everyone will understand you, and that is okay. Not everyone will agree with you, and that is okay. You stop trying to win every person's acceptance, because you finally understand that inner peace is more valuable than temporary validation. You begin protecting your energy instead of constantly sacrificing it for people who do not truly respect you. You stop explaining yourself to everyone. You stop forcing connections that drain your soul. You stop chasing love from people who only appreciate the version of you that keeps abandoning yourself. And something powerful begins happening inside you. You become emotionally independent. You no longer feel controlled by praise or destroyed by criticism. Rejection stops feeling like the end of the world. Other people's opinions stop deciding your worth. Because instead of building your identity around external approval, you begin building it around self-awareness and inner truth. This is where real freedom begins. Because the moment you stop needing everyone to like you, people lose one of their biggest ways of controlling you. 4. Silence helps you understand yourself more deeply. Most people are constantly surrounded by noise. Noise from social media, noise from other people's opinions, noise from entertainment, distractions, pressure, and endless thoughts. Their mind is always busy, but they rarely spend time truly understanding themselves. They know everything happening in the world, yet they barely understand what is happening inside their own mind. Buddhism teaches that silence is one of the most powerful paths to self-awareness, because when external noise becomes quiet, your inner world becomes easier to hear. And for many people, this can feel uncomfortable at first. The moment silence appears, they suddenly face emotions they have been avoiding for years. Fear, loneliness, regret, insecurity, emotional pain. This is why many people constantly distract themselves. They are afraid of being alone with their own mind. But silence reveals truth. When you spend time alone without constantly escaping into distractions, you begin noticing your emotional patterns more clearly. You begin understanding what triggers your anger, what creates your anxiety, and why certain people have so much emotional power over you. You begin seeing how much of your suffering comes from attachment, overthinking, fear of rejection, and the desperate need for approval. Most people never reach this level of awareness because they never slow down long enough to observe themselves honestly. Instead, They spend their lives reacting automatically to everything around them. They become controlled by every emotion, every opinion, and every situation, because they never learned how to sit quietly and observe their own mind. Their inner world remains chaotic because they are constantly consuming outside noise. But silence changes your relationship with yourself. The more time you spend in silence, the more you begin understanding who you truly are beneath all the pressure, expectations, and emotional confusion. You start recognizing your real values instead of blindly following the crowd. You become more aware of your weaknesses, your fears, and your emotional habits. And this awareness is powerful because people cannot easily manipulate someone who deeply understands their own mind. A person who understands themselves notices manipulation much faster. They recognize emotional pressure more clearly. They become aware when someone is trying to control them through guilt, fear, attention, or emotional dependency. Instead of reacting automatically, they pause, observe, and respond with awareness. Silence also teaches emotional independence. When you become comfortable being alone, you stop desperately needing people to constantly fill the emptiness inside you. You stop chasing attention just to avoid loneliness. You stop depending on outside validation to feel valuable. And because of this, people lose many of the emotional tools they once used to control you. This is why solitude is so powerful in Buddhism. Not because isolation magically solves your problems, but because silence allows you to finally meet yourself honestly. And once you truly understand yourself, your mind becomes calmer, clearer, and much harder for the outside world to control. The more deeply you understand your inner world, the less power external chaos has over your peace. 5. People lose power over you when you stop reacting to everything. One of the biggest reasons people lose their peace is because they react to everything emotionally. Every opinion affects them. Every insult ruins their mood. Every misunderstanding becomes a battle. Every small problem controls their mental state. Instead of protecting their energy, they give emotional reactions to everything happening around them. Buddhism teaches that constant emotional reaction weakens the mind. The more reactive you become, the more easily the outside world controls your inner world. A single comment can destroy your peace for hours. One negative interaction can affect your entire day. This is how emotional control begins. Not through physical force, but through unconscious reactions. Manipulative people understand this very well. Some people intentionally provoke emotional reactions because your reaction gives them power. They know exactly how to trigger your anger, guilt, insecurity, jealousy, or frustration. They know that once your emotions become unstable, your thinking becomes unstable too. And when you react emotionally without awareness, you often say things you regret, make impulsive decisions, and lose control over yourself. This is why emotional reactions are dangerous. The moment someone can control your emotions, they begin controlling your behavior. If people can easily make you angry, they control your mood. If they can easily make you feel guilty, they control your decisions. If they can easily trigger insecurity inside you, they control your confidence. Many people spend their entire lives emotionally controlled by the outside world without realizing it. Buddhism teaches that peace does not come from controlling other people. Peace comes from learning how to control your reactions. Because you cannot stop people from judging you, disrespecting you, misunderstanding you, or behaving badly. But you can learn how to stop giving every situation access to your inner peace. This is where self-awareness becomes powerful. The more conscious you become, the more you begin noticing your emotional triggers before reacting to them. You stop reacting automatically like before. Instead of immediately becoming angry, defensive, or emotional, you pause and observe what is happening inside your mind. And that pause changes everything, because awareness creates control. You begin realizing that not every opinion deserves your attention. Not every insult deserves your response. Not every disagreement deserves your energy. Some battles only drain your peace and distract you from your life. Mature awareness teaches you that silence is often more powerful than emotional reaction. Most people react because their ego feels threatened. They desperately want to prove themselves, defend themselves, or win every argument. But Buddhism teaches that constantly defending your ego creates endless suffering. The more attached you are to being understood, respected, or validated by everyone, the more emotionally exhausted you become. But once you truly understand yourself, something powerful happens. You stop feeling the need to react to everything. You stop wasting energy trying to explain yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. You stop chasing the final word in every argument. You stop allowing strangers, critics, or toxic people to control your emotional state so easily. Your calmness becomes stronger than your anger. And this deeply frustrates manipulative people because they can no longer easily control your emotions. They lose access to the emotional reactions they once used against you. Your peace becomes protected because your awareness becomes stronger than your impulses. This does not mean you become emotionless. Buddhism is not teaching emotional suppression. It teaches emotional awareness. You still feel emotions, but you stop becoming controlled by them. You learn how to observe emotions without instantly obeying them. And this creates inner freedom. Because when you stop reacting blindly to everything, people lose one of their greatest powers over you. 6. Knowing yourself means accepting yourself. One of the deepest reasons people suffer emotionally is because they are constantly fighting themselves inside. They do not feel good enough. They compare themselves to everyone around them. They criticize themselves for every mistake. They feel ashamed of their weaknesses, insecure about their flaws, and afraid that if people saw the real them, they would no longer be accepted. So instead of living honestly, they spend their lives hiding behind masks. Some people hide behind confidence while secretly feeling broken inside. Some pretend to be strong while emotionally collapsing in silence. Some become addicted to attention and validation because deep down they do not truly value themselves. And many people spend their entire lives trying to become someone worthy of love, instead of learning how to accept themselves as they already are. Buddhism teaches that much of human suffering comes from resistance. Resistance to reality, resistance to change, resistance to imperfection. And one of the biggest forms of resistance is self-rejection. Most people are not only fighting life, they are fighting themselves every single day. They fight their appearance, they fight their emotions, they fight their past mistakes, they fight their fears, they fight their personality. They constantly think they must become perfect before they deserve peace, love, confidence, or happiness. But this mindset creates endless emotional exhaustion, because perfection never arrives. There will always be someone more successful, more attractive, more talented, or more confident than you. And if your worth depends on becoming better than everyone else, you will spend your entire life feeling emotionally incomplete. This is why self-awareness is so important. The more deeply you understand yourself, the more honestly you begin seeing yourself. Not the fake version created for social approval, not the mask built to impress people, but the real human being underneath all the emotional protection. And true self-awareness eventually leads to self-acceptance. Not because you become flawless, but because you stop expecting yourself to be flawless in the first place. You begin understanding that being human means being imperfect. It means making mistakes. It means having fears, emotional wounds, insecurities, confusion, and difficult moments. Buddhism teaches that suffering increases when you reject these parts of yourself instead of understanding them with awareness and compassion. Many people become easy to manipulate because they secretly hate themselves. This is something most people never admit openly. But when someone feels worthless inside, they become emotionally desperate for outside validation. They become addicted to praise because they cannot give themselves inner peace. They tolerate disrespect because they are afraid of losing attention. They stay in toxic relationships because they believe they cannot do better. They allow people to emotionally control them because deep down they do not believe they deserve better treatment. This is why self-rejection is dangerous. The less you value yourself, the easier it becomes for people to use your insecurities against you. Manipulative people can sense emotional weakness very quickly. They notice when someone constantly seeks approval. They notice when someone is afraid of abandonment. They notice when someone has low self-worth. And they often use these emotional wounds to gain control. Some manipulate through guilt. Some manipulate through attention. Some manipulate through emotional inconsistency. They make you feel special one moment and worthless the next. And because your self-worth depends on their validation, you become emotionally trapped, trying to earn their approval again. This creates emotional dependency, and emotional dependency destroys inner freedom. Buddhism teaches that attachment to external validation creates suffering because anything outside you can disappear at any moment. People change, relationships end, opinions shift, approval fades. If your entire identity depends on external validation, your peace will constantly feel unstable. But when self-awareness grows, something powerful begins happening. You stop searching for your value in the hands of other people. You begin learning how to sit with yourself honestly. You begin understanding your fears instead of hiding from them. You begin recognizing your emotional wounds without hating yourself for having them. And slowly, you stop seeing your imperfections as proof that you are unworthy. Instead, you begin seeing them as part of being human. This changes everything internally. Because self-acceptance creates emotional stability. The moment you stop rejecting yourself, people lose many of the emotional weapons they once used against you. Insults stop hurting as deeply, because your worth no longer depends on other people's opinions. Rejection becomes easier to survive, because you no longer abandon yourself every time someone walks away. Criticism becomes less destructive, because your identity is no longer built entirely on external praise. You become emotionally stronger, because your sense of value comes from within, instead of outside validation. And this kind of confidence is very different from ego. Ego constantly needs to prove itself. Ego becomes defensive, reactive, and insecure. Ego depends on appearing superior. But real self-acceptance is calm. It does not need constant attention. It does not panic when criticized. It does not collapse when misunderstood. Because real confidence comes from knowing yourself honestly. Many people think self-acceptance means becoming lazy or refusing to improve yourself. But Buddhism does not teach passive weakness. Self-awareness allows growth, but growth becomes healthier when it comes from understanding instead of self-hatred. There is a huge difference between improving yourself because you value yourself and improving yourself because you secretly believe you are worthless. One creates peace, the other creates endless suffering. When you hate yourself, no achievement will ever feel enough. No success will fully satisfy you. No amount of praise will permanently heal the emptiness inside. You will constantly chase more validation because the real wound was never external. It was internal. But when you begin accepting yourself deeply, your relationship with life changes. You stop trying to become perfect for everyone. You stop exhausting yourself trying to meet impossible expectations. You stop comparing your entire life to carefully edited versions of other people. And for the first time, you begin feeling emotionally safe within yourself. This is what many people are truly searching for. Not fame, not status, not endless approval, inner safety. The ability to sit alone with yourself without feeling hatred, shame, or emotional emptiness. And this inner peace makes you much harder to manipulate, because emotionally secure people are difficult to control. They do not desperately chase validation. They do not panic when rejected. They do not betray themselves just to keep people around. They are able to walk away from disrespect because they no longer believe suffering is the price of love. Self-awareness also helps you become honest about your patterns. You begin noticing how often fear controls your choices. You begin noticing how attachment creates emotional pain. You begin seeing the relationships, habits, and beliefs that slowly destroy your peace. And instead of blaming the world for everything, you begin taking responsibility for your inner healing. This is where real transformation begins. Not when you become someone completely different, but when you finally stop running away from yourself. Buddhism teaches that peace is not found by becoming a perfect person. Peace is found when you stop fighting your own humanity and begin understanding yourself with awareness and compassion. And this understanding creates freedom, because the more deeply you accept yourself, the less desperate you become for the approval, validation, and emotional permission of others. You stop allowing people to define your worth. You stop shrinking yourself to fit into other people's expectations. You stop abandoning your peace just to avoid rejection. And slowly, your mind becomes calmer, stronger, and more emotionally independent. Because a person who truly accepts themselves cannot be easily controlled by the outside world anymore. 7. Self-knowledge is real freedom. Most people spend their entire lives searching for freedom in the outside world. They believe freedom means having more money, more success, more status, more power, or more control over life. They think freedom will finally arrive once they achieve enough, own enough, or become important enough. But even after gaining many of these things, countless people still feel emotionally trapped inside. Why? Because external success does not automatically create inner freedom. A person can have money and still be controlled by fear. A person can have fame and still be emotionally dependent on other people's opinions. A person can appear confident while secretly feeling empty, insecure, and lost inside. Buddhism teaches that true freedom does not begin outside you. It begins within your own mind. Because if your emotions are controlled by everyone around you, you are not truly free. If your happiness disappears every time someone criticizes you, you are not truly free. If your self-worth depends on praise, validation, relationships, or approval, you are not truly free. If fear constantly controls your decisions, your peace, and your identity, you are not truly free. Most people do not realize how deeply controlled they are by unconscious emotions, social pressure, attachment, and fear. They think they are making free choices, but many of their decisions are secretly driven by insecurity, emotional dependency, fear of rejection, and the desperate need to fit in. This is why self-knowledge is so powerful. The more deeply you understand yourself, the more clearly you begin seeing what truly controls your life. You begin noticing your fears instead of unconsciously obeying them. You begin recognizing your emotional attachments instead of becoming imprisoned by them. You begin understanding your habits, triggers, emotional patterns, and hidden insecurities. And awareness creates freedom, because you cannot free yourself from something you are unconscious of. Most people are not physically imprisoned. They are mentally imprisoned. imprisoned by overthinking, imprisoned by emotional dependency, imprisoned by the fear of being disliked, imprisoned by constant comparison, imprisoned by the opinions of other people, imprisoned by the endless need to prove themselves. Buddhism teaches that much of human suffering comes from attachment and unconscious identification with thoughts and emotions. Most people completely identify with every thought that enters their mind. If their mind says they are worthless, they believe it. If their mind says they are failing, they panic. If their mind becomes anxious, they immediately feel consumed by fear. But self-awareness changes your relationship with the mind itself. The moment you begin observing your thoughts instead of blindly believing them, something powerful happens. You realize that not every thought is true. Not every emotion deserves control over your behavior. Not every fear reflects reality. This realization creates inner space, and inside that space freedom begins growing. Because true freedom is not the ability to control everything happening around you. True freedom is the ability to remain centered within yourself even when life becomes difficult. Many people lose themselves the moment life becomes uncomfortable. A little rejection destroys them emotionally. A little criticism ruins their confidence. A little loneliness makes them desperate for attention. Their emotional state constantly depends on external circumstances. This creates fragile peace, a peace that disappears every time life becomes difficult. But Buddhism teaches that lasting peace comes from understanding yourself deeply enough that external chaos no longer completely controls your inner world. This does not mean you stop feeling pain. It means pain stops controlling your identity. You still experience sadness, disappointment, uncertainty, and emotional struggles because you are human. But self-awareness allows you to experience these emotions without becoming completely consumed by them. And this creates emotional strength. A person who understands themselves deeply becomes much harder to manipulate because they are no longer emotionally blind. They notice when fear is controlling their decisions. They notice when attachment is creating suffering. They notice when people are trying to manipulate them through guilt, validation, attention, or emotional pressure. Instead of reacting automatically, they pause and observe. And observation weakens manipulation. Because manipulation survives through unconscious reactions. Most people are controlled because they react emotionally before becoming aware of what is happening inside them. They become angry before observing their anger. They become insecure before questioning the insecurity. They become emotionally attached before recognizing the attachment. But self-knowledge slows the mind down. It creates awareness between emotion and reaction. And that awareness changes everything. Because once awareness enters the mind, unconscious control begins disappearing. This is why Buddhism places such deep importance on mindfulness and self-observation. Not because awareness magically removes all suffering, but because awareness prevents suffering from controlling your entire life. The more conscious you become, the less power fear has over you, the less power emotional dependency has over you, the less power social pressure has over you, the less power toxic people have over you. And slowly, you begin feeling something many people rarely experience: inner freedom. The freedom to be yourself without constantly needing approval. The freedom to say no without guilt. The freedom to walk away from toxic environments. The freedom to stop explaining yourself to everyone. The freedom to exist without constantly performing for acceptance. The freedom to protect your peace instead of sacrificing it for validation. Most people do not realize how exhausting it is to constantly live for other people's opinions. They spend years trying to become who others expect them to be. They hide parts of themselves to avoid rejection, They suppress their emotions to appear acceptable. They betray their own truth just to feel included. But this slowly destroys the soul. Because a person who abandons themselves to gain acceptance eventually loses all connection with who they truly are. And without self-knowledge, life becomes confusing. You begin chasing goals that do not truly fulfill you. You stay in relationships that destroy your peace. You follow paths that do not align with your heart. You become emotionally exhausted, trying to maintain an identity built around external approval. But self-awareness brings clarity. You begin understanding what genuinely matters to you instead of blindly following the crowd. You become more honest about what drains your peace and what nourishes your spirit. You stop wasting years trying to impress people who do not truly care about your well-being. This creates emotional independence. And emotional independence is one of the greatest forms of freedom a human being can experience. Because emotionally independent people are no longer controlled by praise or destroyed by criticism. They no longer need constant reassurance to feel valuable. They no longer tolerate disrespect just because they fear loneliness. They become internally stable. And internal stability creates strength. Many people think power means controlling others. But Buddhism teaches that the greatest power is self-mastery. Because controlling other people will never create lasting peace. But learning how to understand your own mind changes your entire life. A person who masters themselves becomes calm in chaos. They become less reactive, less emotionally impulsive, less desperate for validation, less controlled by fear, and more connected to inner peace. This is real strength, not loudness, not dominance, not ego. Real strength is the ability to remain aware of yourself even when life becomes difficult. Real freedom is the ability to live according to your inner truth instead of constantly being controlled by external pressure. And this freedom cannot be purchased, given, or forced by the outside world. It can only be developed through deep self-awareness. The more you understand yourself, the less the world controls you. The less the world controls you, the more peaceful your mind becomes. And the more peaceful your mind becomes, the freer you truly are. 8. The more conscious you become, the less the world can control you. Most people live unconsciously. They wake up every day repeating the same emotional patterns, reacting to the same fears, chasing the same validation, and suffering from the same mental habits without ever questioning why. They think they are fully aware of themselves, but in reality, much of their life is controlled by unconscious conditioning. Their emotions control them. Their fears control them. Their desires control them. Other people's opinions control them. Social pressure controls them. And because they never slow down to observe their own mind deeply, they spend years living automatically instead of consciously. Buddhism teaches that unconscious living is one of the greatest causes of suffering. Most people are not suffering only because of life itself. They are suffering because they are asleep within their own mind. They repeat toxic habits without awareness. They react emotionally without awareness. They become attached without awareness. They chase approval without awareness. They allow the outside world to shape their identity because they never developed deep consciousness of who they truly are. This is why becoming conscious changes everything. The moment awareness enters your life, you begin seeing things differently. You begin seeing how many of your fears were created by the mind. You begin seeing how often you abandon yourself just to keep other people comfortable. You begin seeing how emotional attachment creates pain. You begin seeing how desperately the ego wants approval, validation, attention, and control. And once you see these patterns clearly, they slowly begin losing power over you. Because unconscious patterns survive through lack of awareness. The moment you become conscious of something, you stop becoming completely controlled by it. This is why self-awareness is so powerful. Most people never question why they feel the way they feel. They simply react. If they feel angry, they explode. If they feel insecure, they collapse emotionally. If they feel rejected, they panic and start chasing validation again. They never stop to observe the deeper reason behind their emotional reactions. But conscious people begin asking deeper questions. Why does this situation trigger me so strongly? Why am I so afraid of being rejected? Why do I constantly seek approval? Why do certain opinions affect me so deeply? Why do I feel emotionally dependent on people who do not even value me properly? These questions create awareness. And awareness creates transformation. Buddhism teaches that the mind becomes dangerous when left unconscious. An unconscious mind constantly creates suffering because it reacts automatically to everything. It lives trapped between fear of the future and attachment to the past. It constantly compares, judges, worries, and overthinks. This is why so many people feel emotionally exhausted. Their body may be resting, but their mind never stops fighting. Fighting criticism, fighting rejection, fighting insecurity, fighting uncertainty, fighting reality itself. And because they are unconscious of these mental patterns, they believe this suffering is normal. But consciousness changes your relationship with suffering. The more aware you become, the more clearly you begin observing your thoughts instead of blindly believing them. You begin noticing how much of your anxiety comes from imagined scenarios. You begin noticing how often your mind creates unnecessary emotional pain. You begin noticing how attachment and fear constantly pull your peace away from the present moment. This awareness creates distance between you and your thoughts, and that distance creates freedom. Because when you are fully identified with every thought and emotion, life controls you easily. But when you become the observer of your mind instead of the prisoner of your mind, everything changes internally. You stop reacting to every emotion immediately. You stop panicking over every negative thought. You stop allowing temporary feelings to define your identity. You begin realizing that thoughts are passing experiences, not permanent truths. This is one of the deepest forms of freedom Buddhism teaches. Many people believe power comes from controlling others. They want control over situations, relationships, outcomes, and people because they think external control will create inner peace. But even if they gain temporary control, fear still remains inside them. Because the real problem was never outside. It was within the mind itself. A person can control everyone around them and still remain deeply insecure internally. They can gain attention and still feel empty. They can achieve success and still feel emotionally unstable because unconscious fear continues controlling them from within. But consciousness weakens fear. The more conscious you become, the less you blindly obey your emotions and impulses. You begin noticing when the ego wants validation. You begin noticing when attachment is creating suffering. You begin noticing when insecurity is shaping your decisions. And instead of automatically reacting, you pause. That pause is powerful because most people never pause. They instantly react, instantly defend themselves, instantly chase attention, instantly become emotional, instantly seek revenge, instantly panic. But consciousness creates stillness inside the mind. And stillness creates wisdom. This is why deeply conscious people often appear calmer than others. It is not because life became easier for them. It is because they no longer react unconsciously to everything happening around them. They understand that not every opinion deserves emotional energy. Not every conflict deserves a response. Not every person deserves access to their peace. Not every thought deserves belief. This awareness protects their mind. Most people lose their peace because they give too much emotional importance to everything. A stranger's opinion destroys their mood. A small rejection makes them question their worth. A temporary failure makes them feel hopeless. They emotionally attach themselves to every experience without awareness. But conscious people begin seeing life differently. They understand impermanence. Buddhism teaches that everything changes constantly. Emotions change, situations change, relationships change, thoughts change, success changes, pain changes. Nothing remains permanent forever. And once you deeply understand impermanence, you stop emotionally clinging to everything so tightly. You stop panicking every time life changes. You stop believing temporary suffering will last forever. You stop defining yourself by temporary emotions. This creates emotional balance. The more conscious you become, the less emotional chaos controls your life. You begin understanding that peace does not come from controlling life. Peace comes from understanding the mind. And this understanding changes the way you interact with people too. You stop desperately trying to be liked by everyone. You stop exhausting yourself trying to explain your worth. You stop chasing people who constantly disrespect your peace. You stop shrinking yourself just to fit into other people's expectations. Because consciousness helps you recognize what truly matters and what simply drains your soul. Many people spend years emotionally trapped because they are unconscious of their own worth. They allow toxic people into their life repeatedly because they secretly believe they deserve poor treatment. They stay emotionally attached to situations that destroy them because they fear loneliness more than suffering. But awareness breaks these cycles. The moment you become conscious of your patterns, you stop repeating them blindly. You begin protecting your peace more carefully. You begin choosing relationships more wisely. You begin understanding that loneliness is often healthier than constant emotional disrespect. This is emotional maturity. And emotional maturity creates freedom. Buddhism also teaches that the ego creates endless suffering because it constantly seeks identity through external things. The ego wants status, validation, superiority, praise, and recognition because it fears feeling insignificant. This is why many people constantly perform for attention. They want to appear successful, appear powerful, appear admired, appear perfect. But conscious people slowly stop living for appearances, because awareness helps them see how exhausting ego-based living truly is. They stop needing constant validation to feel valuable. They stop competing with everyone. They stop trying to prove themselves constantly. And because of this, their mind becomes lighter, calmer, freer. Most people do not realize how much energy they waste trying to maintain false versions of themselves. They wear masks everywhere they go because they are terrified of being judged. But pretending eventually becomes emotionally exhausting. Deep down, the soul becomes tired of performing. Consciousness removes these masks. The more aware you become, the more honest you become with yourself. You stop pretending to be someone you are not. You stop building your identity around external approval. You stop sacrificing your inner peace just to fit into social expectations. And this honesty creates inner freedom. Because real peace only begins when you stop betraying yourself. Many people search for freedom in travel, money, relationships, success, or attention. But no external achievement can permanently free a mind that remains unconscious. A person who cannot sit peacefully with themselves will suffer anywhere. This is why Buddhism focuses so deeply on inner awareness. Because your mind shapes your experience of life. If the mind is unconscious, fearful, reactive and attached, suffering follows everywhere. But if the mind becomes aware, calm, and deeply conscious, peace becomes possible even during difficulty. This does not mean conscious people never struggle emotionally. They still experience pain, still experience loss, still experience uncertainty. But suffering no longer completely controls them, because awareness allows them to observe emotions without drowning inside them. And this changes everything. Because conscious people stop becoming slaves to every emotional storm. They understand that emotions rise and fall like weather. Thoughts rise and fall like clouds. Situations rise and fall like seasons. Nothing remains forever. And this understanding creates deep inner stability. The more conscious you become, the less easily manipulated you become. Because manipulation depends on unconsciousness. Fear-based manipulation only works when you are unconscious of your fear. Guilt-based manipulation only works when you are unconscious of your emotional patterns. Validation-based manipulation only works when you are unconscious of your self-worth. But awareness exposes manipulation clearly. You begin recognizing when people try to control you emotionally. You begin noticing when your ego is reacting. You begin noticing when fear is making decisions for you. And this awareness gives you the power to choose differently. That is real freedom. Not the freedom to control the world, but the freedom to stop being controlled by it. Because the more conscious you become, the less power fear, validation, attachment, and external pressure have over your mind. And eventually, something beautiful begins happening. Your peace stops depending on the outside world. You become calmer inside, more emotionally stable, more grounded, more aware, more connected to yourself, and less controlled by the chaos around you. This is why Buddhism teaches that awakening is not about escaping life. It is about finally seeing life clearly. And once you truly see clearly, the world loses much of its power to control you anymore. 9. Stop abandoning yourself to keep everyone happy. One of the saddest things many people do is slowly abandon themselves just to be accepted by others. They hide their real emotions. They silence their true opinions. They ignore their own needs. They tolerate disrespect. They say yes when they want to say no. They constantly sacrifice their peace just to avoid disappointing people. And over time, they lose all connection with who they truly are. Buddhism teaches that attachment to approval creates deep suffering, because the more you depend on acceptance from others, the more disconnected you become from yourself. Many people spend their entire lives trying to keep everyone happy, while secretly feeling emotionally exhausted inside. They become so focused on being loved, accepted, understood, and needed that they forget to ask themselves one important question: what about my own peace? Most people are afraid of rejection. They are afraid that if they speak honestly, set boundaries, or stop pleasing everyone, people will leave them. So they constantly betray themselves to maintain relationships, attention, or approval. But this creates a painful inner conflict. Because every time you abandon yourself to keep others comfortable, a part of you suffers silently. You may smile on the outside, while feeling emotionally empty inside. You may appear kind and supportive, while secretly feeling resentful, exhausted, and drained. You may constantly help everyone around you, while completely neglecting your own emotional needs. This is not inner peace. This is emotional self-abandonment. And many people have been doing it for so long that they no longer even recognize it. Buddhism teaches that suffering grows when you live disconnected from your authentic self. The moment your entire identity becomes built around pleasing others, your happiness becomes controlled by external reactions. If people approve of you, you feel valuable. If people criticize you, you feel broken. If people become distant, You panic emotionally. This creates emotional dependence. And emotional dependence destroys freedom. Many people believe being good means constantly sacrificing themselves for everyone else. They think they must always be available, always agreeable, always understanding, and always emotionally giving no matter how drained they feel. But constantly abandoning yourself does not create healthy love. It creates emotional exhaustion. Because no human being can continuously ignore their own needs without eventually suffering internally. This is why many people secretly feel lost, even while surrounded by others. They have spent so many years becoming who everyone else wanted them to be, that they no longer know who they truly are. They lost themselves while trying to avoid rejection. They lost themselves while trying to avoid conflict. They lost themselves while trying to be loved by everyone. But Buddhism teaches something deeply important. You cannot find peace while constantly betraying yourself. The more you ignore your inner truth, the more emotionally disconnected you become. Deep down, the soul becomes tired of pretending. It becomes tired of constantly performing for acceptance. It becomes tired of shrinking itself just to fit into other people's expectations. Many people are physically alive but emotionally disconnected from themselves. They wake up every day already emotionally exhausted because they are carrying relationships, expectations, pressures, and emotional responsibilities that slowly destroy their peace. They are constantly trying to manage how others feel while completely neglecting their own inner world. This creates silent suffering. And because they fear disappointing others, they continue sacrificing themselves again and again. But eventually, something inside begins breaking. Because the soul cannot survive forever without honesty. This is why self-awareness is so powerful. The moment you begin understanding yourself more deeply, you begin recognizing how often you abandon your own peace for external approval. You begin noticing how many of your decisions come from fear instead of truth. You begin noticing how often guilt controls your choices. And this awareness changes everything. Because once you clearly see your self-abandonment, it becomes harder to continue living that way unconsciously. You begin asking deeper questions. Why am I so afraid of disappointing people? Why do I feel guilty for protecting my peace? Why do I constantly seek validation from people who barely value me properly? Why do I ignore my emotional needs just to avoid conflict? These questions create consciousness, and consciousness begins healing. Buddhism teaches that attachment to being liked creates suffering because it forces you to constantly live according to other people's expectations instead of your own inner truth. The more desperate you become for approval, the easier it becomes for people to emotionally manipulate you. Manipulative people often target those who struggle with self-worth because they know guilt and fear will control them easily. They know emotionally dependent people will tolerate disrespect just to avoid abandonment. They know people who fear rejection will struggle to set boundaries. This is why learning to protect your peace is not selfish. It is necessary. Many people were taught that prioritizing themselves is wrong. They were taught to constantly please others even at the cost of their own emotional health. But Buddhism teaches balance, awareness, and compassion, not self-destruction. You cannot continuously pour energy into everyone else while abandoning yourself internally. Eventually, emotional burnout appears. This is why boundaries are important. A boundary is not hatred. A boundary is self-respect. A boundary is saying, my peace matters too. Conscious people understand this deeply. They understand that not every relationship deserves unlimited access to their energy. They understand that constantly tolerating disrespect does not make them spiritually evolved. They understand that protecting their mental and emotional peace is part of inner wisdom. Most people are terrified of setting boundaries because they fear people will become upset. But Buddhism teaches that attachment to keeping everyone comfortable often creates suffering inside yourself. Sometimes people become uncomfortable the moment you stop allowing them to control you. Sometimes people become angry when you stop abandoning yourself for them. Sometimes people leave when you stop sacrificing your peace to maintain the relationship. And painful as this may feel, awareness teaches you something important. Anyone who only values the version of you that constantly abandons themselves does not truly value the real you. This realization changes your relationships completely. You stop chasing people who only appreciate your silence, obedience, or emotional sacrifice. You stop begging for love from people who drain your spirit. You stop tolerating emotional manipulation just to avoid loneliness. Because self-awareness helps you understand something deeply powerful, loneliness is painful, but self-betrayal is even more painful. Many people fear being alone so much that they remain trapped in unhealthy emotional environments for years. They tolerate emotional disrespect because they believe losing people would hurt more than losing themselves. But slowly, their inner peace disappears. Their confidence disappears. Their identity disappears. Because every time you betray yourself repeatedly, your connection with your soul weakens. This is why inner honesty matters so much. The more conscious you become, the more you begin listening to yourself again. You begin noticing what drains your energy and what nourishes it. You begin noticing which relationships feel peaceful and which ones feel emotionally heavy. You begin understanding the difference between healthy love and emotional dependency. And this awareness gives you strength. Not aggressive strength, not ego-based strength, but calm inner strength. The strength to say no without guilt. The strength to stop over-explaining yourself. The strength to leave toxic environments. The strength to disappoint people when necessary. The strength to choose peace over approval. This is emotional maturity. And emotional maturity changes your entire life. Because once you stop abandoning yourself to keep everyone happy, your relationship with yourself begins healing. You stop seeing your needs as unimportant. You stop treating your peace like something that must always be sacrificed. You stop believing your worth depends on how useful, pleasing, or emotionally available you are to others. Instead, you begin respecting your own humanity. You begin understanding that your emotions matter too. Your peace matters too. Your mental health matters too. Your boundaries matter too. And this changes your energy completely. You become calmer because you are no longer constantly pretending. You become lighter because you stop carrying relationships that destroy your peace. You become more authentic because you stop performing for approval. And most importantly, you begin reconnecting with yourself again. This is one of the deepest forms of healing. Because true peace begins the moment you stop abandoning yourself just to avoid losing others. Buddhism teaches that attachment to approval creates suffering, but self-awareness creates freedom. The more deeply you know yourself, the less willing you become to sacrifice your soul for temporary acceptance. And eventually, something beautiful begins happening. You stop chasing relationships that require self-betrayal. You stop begging to be understood by everyone. You stop shrinking yourself to fit into places that cannot honor your true self. And instead of constantly asking, "How can I make everyone happy?" you finally begin asking, "How can I live honestly without abandoning my own peace anymore?" 10. Real peace begins when you stop seeking your worth in other people. One of the biggest reasons people suffer emotionally is because they spend their entire lives searching for their value in the hands of others. In the hands of others. They want people to approve of them, praise them, choose them, admire them, need them. And because they secretly believe their worth depends on external validation, they become emotionally controlled by the reactions of other people. If someone compliments them, they feel valuable. If someone ignores them, they feel invisible. If someone rejects them, they feel broken. If someone criticizes them, they begin questioning themselves completely. This is why so many people live emotionally unstable lives. Their peace depends on things outside their control. Buddhism teaches that attachment creates suffering, and one of the deepest attachments many people carry is attachment to validation. They constantly seek emotional confirmation from the outside world because they have never truly developed inner stability within themselves. Most people do not realize how exhausting this way of living becomes. They overthink every interaction, overanalyze every message, constantly worry about what others think, change themselves to avoid rejection, pretend to be someone else to gain acceptance. And slowly, their entire identity becomes built around external approval instead of inner truth. This creates silent emotional suffering, because no matter how much validation they receive, it never feels permanent. The praise fades, attention disappears, people change, relationships end. And because their worth was attached to external things, their emotional state constantly rises and falls depending on other people's reactions. This creates emotional instability. Buddhism teaches that lasting peace can never come from things that constantly change. And people constantly change. Opinions constantly change. Validation constantly changes. This is why building your worth around external approval creates endless emotional insecurity. Because the outside world is unpredictable, many people spend years trying to become enough for everyone around them. Enough for family, enough for society, enough for relationships, enough for social media, enough for strangers. But the painful truth is that no matter how much you change yourself, there will always be someone who misunderstands you, criticizes you, rejects you, or refuses to appreciate you. And if your self-worth depends entirely on being accepted by everyone, you will suffer endlessly. This is why self-awareness matters so deeply. The more you understand yourself, the less desperate you become for outside validation. You begin realizing that constantly chasing approval is a losing battle, because no amount of external praise can permanently heal internal insecurity. The problem was never the lack of validation. The problem was the lack of self-connection. Many people are disconnected from themselves. They do not truly know who they are outside of what other people think about them. They became so emotionally dependent on approval that they forgot how to feel valuable on their own. This creates emotional emptiness. And emotionally empty people become easy to manipulate. Manipulative people often use validation as control. They give attention when they want something. They withdraw affection to create insecurity. They make people emotionally dependent on praise, approval, or emotional reassurance. And because many people already feel incomplete inside, they become trapped chasing emotional validation from those who control it. This is why attachment to approval is dangerous. The more your happiness depends on external validation, the more power you give other people over your emotional state. Buddhism teaches that true peace begins when you stop seeking your worth outside yourself, not because relationships and love are meaningless, but because your entire identity cannot depend on them. If your peace only exists when others approve of you, then your peace is extremely fragile. Real inner stability comes from self-awareness. The moment you begin understanding yourself deeply, Your relationship with validation changes. You stop constantly needing reassurance to feel valuable. You stop chasing approval from people who barely understand you. You stop begging for emotional recognition from people who cannot even recognize their own inner emptiness. And this changes your entire energy. You become calmer, less desperate, less emotionally reactive, less dependent on attention. Because your worth no longer completely depends on how others respond to you. Many people think confidence means becoming arrogant or emotionally cold, but Buddhism teaches something very different. Real inner confidence comes from self-understanding and inner peace, not superiority over others. An emotionally secure person does not constantly need to prove their value. They do not panic when criticized. They do not collapse emotionally when rejected. They do not desperately chase validation from everyone around them. Because deep down, they already know their worth. This creates emotional freedom. Most people are trapped in emotional performance. They constantly try to appear successful, attractive, intelligent, interesting or valuable because they fear being ignored or rejected. Their life becomes a non-stop performance for approval. But performing eventually becomes exhausting. The soul becomes tired of pretending, tired of seeking permission to feel worthy, tired of trying to impress everyone, tired of sacrificing authenticity for acceptance. This is why so many people secretly feel emotionally drained even when they appear successful externally, because external validation cannot replace inner peace. You can receive attention and still feel empty. You can receive praise and still feel insecure. You can be surrounded by people and still feel deeply lonely inside. Because emotional emptiness is not solved by more approval. It is solved through self-awareness and inner healing. Buddhism teaches that peace begins when you stop running away from yourself. When you stop trying to become worthy through external achievements and begin understanding your own humanity with awareness and compassion. This changes the way you experience life. You stop constantly comparing yourself to everyone around you. You stop feeling destroyed every time someone rejects you. You stop taking every opinion personally. You stop needing to win everyone's approval. Because your sense of value becomes internal instead of external. And this creates enormous emotional freedom. The more connected you become with yourself, the less emotionally dependent you become on other people's reactions. Praise becomes enjoyable, but no longer necessary for your survival. Criticism becomes easier to handle because your entire identity is not built around external opinions anymore. You begin realizing something deeply important. Other people's opinions are reflections of their own mind, experiences, insecurities, and perspectives. They are not absolute definitions of your worth. This awareness protects your peace. Most people suffer because they personalize everything. If someone ignores them, they immediately assume they are unworthy. If someone criticizes them, they believe something is wrong with them. If someone leaves, they believe they are not lovable enough. But self-awareness creates emotional maturity. You begin understanding that not every rejection is personal. Not every criticism defines you. Not every opinion deserves emotional authority over your mind. This realization creates deep inner strength. And this strength makes manipulation much harder. Because emotionally secure people are difficult to control. They are not easily manipulated through guilt, praise, rejection, or emotional inconsistency, because they are no longer starving for validation. They no longer need constant emotional permission to feel valuable. This does not mean they stop caring about others. It means they stop abandoning themselves for approval. There is a huge difference. Buddhism teaches compassion, but compassion without self-awareness often becomes self-destruction. Many people continuously sacrifice their peace for relationships that slowly drain their soul because they confuse emotional suffering with love. But true peace requires honesty. Honesty about what nourishes your spirit and what destroys it. Honesty about which relationships are healthy and which ones are emotionally harmful. Honesty about how often you betray yourself just to avoid loneliness or rejection. And this honesty changes your life. Because the more conscious you become, the more carefully you protect your inner peace. You stop chasing people who only value you when you are useful. You stop begging for attention from emotionally unavailable people. You stop exhausting yourself trying to prove your worth. Because you finally understand something deeply powerful, your value does not increase when people choose you, and your value does not decrease when people reject you. Your worth exists before anyone approves of you. This realization changes everything internally. You begin feeling emotionally safer within yourself. You stop panicking every time someone pulls away. You stop overanalyzing every interaction. You stop needing constant reassurance to feel loved. And slowly, your nervous system becomes calmer because your identity is no longer built on unstable external validation. This is real emotional freedom, not becoming cold, not becoming emotionless, but becoming internally stable enough that your peace no longer completely depends on the outside world. Many people spend decades trying to gain peace by controlling how others see them. But Buddhism teaches that peace begins when you stop trying to control everyone's perception of you and start understanding yourself more deeply instead. Because no matter how perfectly you behave, some people will still misunderstand you. Some people will dislike you. Some people will judge you unfairly. Some people will leave. And if your peace depends on avoiding all rejection and criticism, peace will never fully arrive. But once you stop seeking your worth in other people, something beautiful begins happening. You start living more honestly, more calmly, more authentically. You stop performing for acceptance. You stop shrinking yourself for approval. You stop carrying the exhausting pressure of constantly trying to be enough for everyone. And for the first time, you begin experiencing something many people rarely feel: inner peace that does not depend on external validation anymore. Because the moment you stop searching for your worth in the hands of others, you finally begin reconnecting with the value that was already inside you all along. 11. Your mind becomes peaceful when you stop trying to control everything. One of the biggest reasons people suffer mentally and emotionally is because they are constantly trying to control life. They try to control people, control outcomes, control the future, control how others see them, control situations, control timing, control uncertainty. And because life never fully obeys human control, they spend most of their lives anxious, frustrated, emotionally exhausted, and mentally overwhelmed. Buddhism teaches that attachment to control creates suffering because life itself is unpredictable. No matter how intelligent, prepared, disciplined, or careful you are, there will always be things outside your control. People will change, situations will change, relationships will change, plans will fail, unexpected pain will appear. Uncertainty will remain part of life no matter how badly the mind wants absolute security. But most people mentally fight this reality every single day. They constantly overthink the future because they are trying to control what has not happened yet. They replay the past because they are trying to mentally change what already happened. They become emotionally attached to specific outcomes and then suffer deeply when life unfolds differently. This creates endless inattention. The mind becomes exhausted because it is constantly trying to force reality into its preferred shape. And slowly, peace disappears. Many people do not even realize how much energy they waste trying to control everything. Their body may be physically resting, but their mind never stops working. They constantly analyze conversations, imagine worst-case scenarios, worry about rejection, fear uncertainty, and emotionally cling to expectations. This is why so many people feel mentally tired all the time. Not because life is always terrible, but because their mind is constantly resisting reality. Buddhism teaches that suffering increases when you mentally fight what you cannot control. The more tightly you cling to certainty, the more fearful and anxious you become, because life will never give complete certainty. This does not mean you stop caring about your life. It means you stop trying to control every detail of existence. There is a huge difference. Many people believe control creates safety, but often excessive control creates anxiety instead. The more desperately you try to control everything, the more terrified you become of losing control. And because life constantly changes, fear becomes permanent. People who struggle deeply with control often feel emotionally overwhelmed by uncertainty. They need constant reassurance, constant clarity, constant predictability. But life cannot always provide these things. Sometimes situations remain unclear. Sometimes outcomes remain uncertain. Sometimes people behave unpredictably no matter how much effort you give. And this reality becomes emotionally painful for those who are attached to control. Buddhism teaches that peace begins when you stop trying to force life to unfold exactly the way your mind demands. Most suffering comes from arguing with reality internally. This should not be happening. This person should behave differently. My life should look different by now. I should already have everything figured out. These mental expectations create resistance, and resistance creates suffering. The more you resist reality, the more emotionally heavy life feels. Many people spend years emotionally exhausted because they cannot accept uncertainty. They constantly try to predict every possible problem before it happens. They overthink every conversation. They become attached to outcomes they cannot fully control. And because reality rarely unfolds perfectly, disappointment becomes constant. This creates emotional instability, because your peace becomes dependent on everything going exactly the way you want. But life was never designed to function according to human attachment. Buddhism teaches impermanence. Everything changes continuously. Emotions change, circumstances change, relationships change, health changes, opportunities change. Nothing remains fixed forever. And the moment you deeply understand this truth, your relationship with control begins changing. You stop expecting permanent certainty from an impermanent world. This creates emotional freedom. Most people suffer because they confuse uncertainty with danger. The moment life becomes unclear, they panic emotionally. But uncertainty is not always a sign that something terrible is happening. Sometimes uncertainty is simply part of being alive. The future has always been uncertain, yet most people spend their entire lives mentally fighting this reality instead of learning how to live peacefully within it. Buddhism teaches that peace does not come from controlling life. Peace comes from learning how to remain calm even when life feels uncertain. This is real inner strength, not controlling every outcome, but remaining emotionally grounded despite uncertainty. Many people become emotionally destroyed whenever life does not follow their expectations. A relationship ends unexpectedly. A plan fails. Someone disappoints them. Timing changes. And because they were emotionally attached to controlling the outcome, they collapse internally. But self-awareness changes this. The more conscious you become, the more you begin noticing how attachment to control creates emotional suffering. You begin seeing how much anxiety comes from trying to force certainty onto an uncertain world. And slowly, you begin letting go, not because you become weak, but because you become wiser. You realize that trying to mentally control everything only destroys your peace. This changes your relationship with life completely. You still care, still work hard, still make plans, still protect your goals, but you stop emotionally destroying yourself over things you cannot fully control. You stop obsessively trying to force outcomes. You stop overanalyzing every possible future. You stop panicking every time uncertainty appears. And slowly, your nervous system becomes calmer. Because acceptance creates peace. Most people misunderstand acceptance. They think acceptance means giving up or becoming passive. But Buddhism teaches something deeper. Acceptance means seeing reality clearly instead of constantly mentally fighting it. You accept that people are imperfect. You accept that uncertainty exists. You accept that change is unavoidable. You accept that life cannot always be controlled. And this acceptance removes enormous emotional pressure from the mind. Because the moment you stop fighting reality internally, your mind becomes lighter. Many people suffer not only because of painful situations, but because they continuously replay those situations mentally. They refuse to let go. They argue with reality inside their head for months or even years. This should not have happened. They should not have treated me this way. My life should be different. But reality already happened. And mentally resisting what already exists only creates additional suffering. Buddhism teaches that attachment to how life should be often blinds people from experiencing life as it truly is. This is why awareness matters so much. The more conscious you become, the more you notice how much suffering your own mind creates through resistance, fear, attachment, and over-control. You begin seeing that many thoughts are not helping you. They are simply exhausting you. And this realization changes your inner world. You stop trying to solve every future problem before it happens. You stop needing constant certainty to feel okay. You stop emotionally collapsing every time life changes direction. Because slowly, you begin trusting yourself instead of trying to control everything outside yourself. This is emotional maturity. Many people believe peace will finally arrive once life becomes fully predictable and controlled. But that day never truly comes. There will always be uncertainty somewhere. Always something changing. Always something beyond control. And if your peace depends on controlling everything perfectly, peace will remain impossible. But Buddhism teaches something deeply liberating. You do not need complete control over life to experience inner peace. You only need awareness. Awareness of what you can control and what you cannot. Awareness of when attachment is creating suffering. Awareness of when fear is controlling the mind. Awareness of when overthinking is destroying your peace. This awareness creates emotional balance, and emotional balance changes everything. You become calmer during uncertainty, more patient during difficulty, less reactive during change, less emotionally dependent on perfect outcomes. You stop feeling like every uncomfortable situation is the end of the world. Because you understand something deeply important, life has always been uncertain, and yet life continues moving forward. This realization creates trust, not blind trust that life will always be easy, but trust that you can survive uncertainty without destroying yourself mentally. Most people underestimate how much emotional suffering comes from over-control. Their mind never rests because it is constantly trying to predict, manage, and prevent every possible problem. But many problems never even happen. The mind creates endless imaginary suffering through fear. Buddhism teaches that much anxiety comes from attachment to imagined futures instead of awareness of the present moment. Most people are physically alive in the present but mentally trapped in the future. What if this goes wrong? What if I fail? What if they leave? What if things do not work out? And because the mind constantly lives inside imagined fears, peace disappears. But conscious awareness brings the mind back to reality. Right now, this moment, this breath, this experience. And slowly life becomes lighter again. The more present you become, the less power fear has over you. Because fear survives through future imagination. But peace exists in the present. This is why Buddhism teaches mindfulness so deeply. Not because mindfulness removes all pain, but because it prevents the mind from constantly drowning inside imagined suffering. And eventually, something beautiful begins happening. You stop trying to control every detail of life. You stop emotionally exhausting yourself over uncertainty. You stop mentally fighting reality every day. And instead of forcing life constantly, you begin flowing with it more peacefully. This does not mean life becomes perfect. It means your relationship with life becomes healthier, calmer, lighter, more aware. Because real peace begins the moment you stop trying to control everything and start learning how to trust life without losing yourself in fear anymore. 12. The strongest person is the one who has mastered their own mind. Most people think strength is something external. They think strength means power, status, money, influence, physical dominance, or the ability to control others. They admire loud confidence, aggressive behavior, and people who appear emotionally untouchable on the outside. But Buddhism teaches a very different understanding of strength. Real strength is not about controlling other people. Real strength is about controlling yourself. Because a person can appear powerful externally while remaining completely weak internally. They can have money and still be controlled by fear. They can have influence and still be emotionally unstable. They can appear confident while secretly being destroyed by insecurity, anger, attachment, and emotional dependence. This is why external power does not always create inner peace. Many people spend their entire lives trying to conquer the world, while never learning how to conquer their own mind. And because of this, they remain emotionally controlled by every situation around them. A small criticism ruins their confidence. A little rejection destroys their peace. A little uncertainty creates anxiety. A little emotional pain controls their entire state of mind. Buddhism teaches that the uncontrolled mind is the source of much human suffering. Most people are not destroyed by life itself. They are destroyed by the chaos inside their own mind. Their thoughts constantly attack them. Their fears constantly control them. Their attachments constantly weaken them. Their emotions constantly overpower them. And because they never learned how to observe and master their inner world, they remain emotionally fragile, no matter how successful they appear externally. This is why self-mastery is one of the greatest forms of power. Because the moment you begin understanding your own mind deeply, you stop becoming a slave to every emotion, thought, impulse, and fear. Most people react automatically to everything. If they feel angry, they explode. If they feel insecure, they seek validation. If they feel rejected, they panic emotionally. If they feel lonely, they chase unhealthy attachments. If they feel afraid, they avoid growth. Their emotions completely control their behavior. But Buddhism teaches awareness instead of unconscious reaction. The stronger your awareness becomes, the stronger your mind becomes. Because awareness creates space between emotion and reaction, and inside that space, wisdom appears. This is what separates emotionally mature people from emotionally reactive people. Reactive people immediately obey every feeling. Conscious people observe feelings before acting on them. This creates enormous inner strength. Most people think emotional control means suppressing emotions, But Buddhism teaches something much deeper. Suppression is not mastery. Ignoring emotions is not wisdom. Pretending not to care is not inner peace. Real self-mastery means understanding your emotions without becoming controlled by them. It means feeling anger without becoming consumed by rage, feeling fear without allowing fear to control your decisions, feeling sadness without completely losing yourself inside pain, feeling attachment without becoming emotionally imprisoned by it. This kind of inner balance is true strength, and very few people develop it. Most people spend years trying to control external situations because they are unable to control themselves internally. They become obsessed with changing others, fixing people, forcing outcomes and controlling circumstances because they believe external control will create peace. But no amount of external control can calm an undisciplined mind. A person with an untrained mind will suffer anywhere, even in success, even in relationships, even in comfortable situations, because suffering follows the uncontrolled mind everywhere. Buddhism teaches that the mind can either become your greatest source of peace or your greatest source of suffering, depending on your level of awareness. Most people never train the mind. They train their appearance, train their career, train their social image, but they never train awareness. So the mind becomes chaotic, constant overthinking, constant emotional reaction, constant comparison, constant insecurity, constant fear. And because the mind remains undisciplined, peace remains unstable. This is why inner discipline matters so much. The strongest people are often not the loudest people. They are the calmest people, the most emotionally stable people, the people who remain grounded during difficulty, the people who do not collapse emotionally every time life becomes uncomfortable. Because true strength reveals itself during chaos. Anyone can appear peaceful when life is easy. But when rejection appears, when uncertainty appears, when pain appears, when failure appears, that is when the quality of the mind becomes visible. Most people immediately lose themselves during difficult moments because they never developed emotional discipline. Their peace depends entirely on external comfort. But Buddhism teaches that real peace must become internal, not conditional. If your peace only exists when everything goes perfectly, then it is fragile peace. Real inner strength means remaining aware, even when life becomes painful. Not because you stop feeling emotions, but because emotions stop controlling your entire identity. Many people fear emotional pain so deeply that they spend their whole lives avoiding discomfort. They avoid rejection, avoid failure, avoid solitude, avoid uncertainty, avoid emotional honesty. And because they constantly avoid discomfort, their mind becomes weaker over time. Buddhism teaches that awareness grows through observing discomfort instead of constantly escaping it. This changes your relationship with suffering completely. Instead of immediately running from pain, you begin understanding it. Instead of instantly reacting emotionally, you observe what the mind is doing. Instead of becoming controlled by fear, you study it consciously. And slowly, the mind becomes stronger, not through aggression, but through awareness. Most people underestimate how powerful calmness truly is. A calm mind sees clearly. A reactive mind sees emotionally. When the mind becomes overwhelmed by anger, fear, insecurity, or attachment, clear thinking disappears. This is why emotionally reactive people often make destructive decisions. Their emotions temporarily overpower their awareness. But conscious people develop the ability to pause, and that pause changes everything. Because the ability to pause before reacting is one of the highest forms of self-control. Most people react automatically. They instantly defend themselves, instantly argue, instantly panic, instantly seek revenge, instantly overthink. But the disciplined mind remains aware before reacting, and this awareness protects peace. Buddhism teaches that mastering the mind is a lifelong practice because the ego constantly seeks control, validation, attention, superiority, and emotional attachment. The ego wants to feel important, it wants to avoid discomfort, it wants constant reassurance and certainty. And when people remain unconscious of the ego, suffering increases, because they become emotionally controlled by endless desires and fears. This is why mindfulness matters so deeply. Mindfulness allows you to observe the ego instead of blindly obeying it. You begin noticing when pride is controlling your reactions, when insecurity is controlling your choices, when attachment is creating suffering, when fear is limiting your life. And this awareness weakens unconscious behavior. The more aware you become, the more emotionally free you become, because unconscious emotions lose power when clearly observed. Many people believe emotional reactions are proof of authenticity. They think instantly expressing every feeling is healthy. But Buddhism teaches balance. An uncontrolled emotional reaction often creates more suffering, not less. Anger spoken unconsciously destroys relationships. Fear obeyed unconsciously destroys opportunities. Attachment followed unconsciously destroys peace. This is why wisdom requires awareness. The strongest mind is not the mind that feels nothing. It is the mind that remains conscious even while feeling everything. This creates emotional intelligence. And emotional intelligence changes every part of life. You stop allowing temporary emotions to control permanent decisions. You stop giving every negative thought authority over your identity. You stop becoming emotionally destroyed by situations that once controlled you completely. Because awareness strengthens inner stability. Many people also confuse emotional numbness with strength. They become cold, disconnected, and emotionally shut down because they think avoiding feelings makes them powerful. But emotional suppression is not peace. It is hidden suffering. Buddhism teaches openness without attachment. You allow emotions to exist without becoming trapped inside them. You observe emotions instead of resisting them or drowning in them. This creates emotional balance. And emotional balance creates freedom. Most suffering comes from unconscious identification. I am my anger. I am my fear. I am my sadness. I am my insecurity. But awareness teaches something deeper. You are the observer of these experiences, not the experiences themselves. Thoughts come and go. Emotions come and go. Pain comes and go. Nothing remains permanent forever. And once you deeply understand impermanence, emotional suffering loses some of its control over your mind. This is why deeply aware people often appear calmer than others. Not because their life became easier, but because they stopped becoming emotionally consumed by every passing storm inside the mind. They understand that emotions rise and fall naturally. And this understanding creates patience. The strongest person is not the person who never struggles. It is the person who remains conscious during struggle. The person who continues choosing awareness instead of unconscious reaction. The person who continues protecting inner peace instead of feeding emotional chaos. The person who refuses to let fear, anger, attachment, and insecurity completely control their life. This is true mastery. And true mastery changes the way you experience the world. You stop feeling controlled by every opinion. You stop panicking every time uncertainty appears. You stop becoming emotionally dependent on validation. You stop reacting impulsively to every uncomfortable emotion. Because your awareness becomes stronger than your impulses. And eventually, something powerful begins happening. Your mind becomes quieter, calmer, more stable, more disciplined, more peaceful. Not because life stopped changing, but because you finally stopped allowing every external situation to control your inner world. This is why Buddhism teaches that the greatest victory is not victory over others. The greatest victory is victory over yourself. Because the moment you master your own mind, the world loses much of its power to control you. Your life changes the moment you stop escaping yourself. Most people spend their entire lives trying to escape themselves. They escape through distractions, through constant noise, through endless scrolling, through emotional dependency, through unhealthy relationships, through entertainment, through work, through approval, through busyness. And the reason many people constantly distract themselves is because deep down they are uncomfortable being alone with their own mind. Silence feels uncomfortable to them. Stillness feels uncomfortable. Being alone with their thoughts feels uncomfortable. So instead of understanding themselves, they spend years running from themselves. Buddhism teaches that much of human suffering comes from unconscious avoidance. People avoid pain instead of understanding it, avoid fear instead of observing it, avoid loneliness instead of learning from it, avoid emotional honesty because they are afraid of what they may discover inside themselves. But avoidance never creates peace. It only delays awareness, and delayed awareness eventually becomes suffering. Most people are not emotionally exhausted only because life is difficult. They are exhausted because they are constantly escaping themselves instead of healing themselves. Every unresolved emotion remains inside the mind. Every suppressed fear remains inside the nervous system. Every ignored emotional wound continues shaping behavior unconsciously. And because people never slow down long enough to understand themselves honestly, they repeat the same painful cycles over and over again. The same emotional attachments, the same toxic patterns, the same insecurities, the same fears, the same suffering. Buddhism teaches that awareness is the beginning of transformation, but awareness requires honesty, and honesty requires stillness. This is why many people fear solitude so deeply, because when external distractions disappear, inner truth becomes impossible to ignore. Suddenly, the mind becomes louder. The emotional pain appears, the loneliness appears, the fear appears, the emptiness appears, and many people immediately run back toward distractions because they do not know how to sit peacefully with themselves. But escaping yourself slowly destroys inner peace, because no matter where you run, your mind follows you everywhere. You can change cities, change relationships, change careers, change environments. But if you never understand yourself deeply, suffering continues repeating in different forms. Many people believe external change alone will heal them. If I find the right relationship, I will finally feel complete. If I become successful, I will finally feel valuable. If people approve of me, I will finally feel enough. But Buddhism teaches something deeper. No external achievement can permanently heal internal disconnection, because the root suffering exists within the relationship you have with yourself. Many people are disconnected from themselves without realizing it. They do not know what they truly feel anymore. They do not know what genuinely brings them peace. They do not know who they are outside of social expectations. They spent so many years performing for acceptance that they lost touch with their authentic self completely. This creates emotional emptiness, and emotionally disconnected people often become dependent on external stimulation to avoid facing themselves. They constantly need noise, attention, validation, or emotional excitement, because silence forces them to confront their inner world. But Buddhism teaches that healing begins the moment you stop escaping yourself. Not because the process feels easy, but because truth finally becomes visible. The moment you become willing to sit honestly with yourself, awareness begins growing. You begin noticing your emotional patterns. You begin understanding your fears. You begin recognizing your attachments, insecurities, and unconscious behaviors. And this awareness changes everything. Because unconscious suffering survives through avoidance. The moment awareness enters the mind, transformation becomes possible. Most people never truly observe their own mind. They instantly react to every thought and emotion without questioning it. If they feel lonely, they immediately seek distraction. If they feel insecure, they immediately seek validation. If they feel emotional discomfort, they immediately try to escape it. But conscious people learn how to pause. And this pause creates wisdom. Instead of immediately running from discomfort, they begin observing it. Why am I afraid of being alone? Why do I constantly seek validation? Why do I feel emotionally empty without attention? Why do I keep repeating the same painful relationships? Why do I fear silence so much? These questions create self-awareness. And self-awareness creates healing. Because once you begin understanding the root of your suffering, you stop becoming blindly controlled by it. Buddhism teaches that the mind often creates suffering through attachment and resistance. People become attached to distractions because distractions temporarily numb emotional pain. But temporary numbness is not healing. A distracted mind may feel temporarily relieved, but unresolved suffering always returns eventually. This is why so many people remain emotionally exhausted despite constantly chasing pleasure, attention, entertainment, or stimulation. Nothing fully satisfies them because the real issue was never outside. The real issue was the relationship with themselves. Many people secretly fear themselves. They fear their own thoughts, fear their emotions, fear their loneliness, fear their insecurities, fear the possibility that beneath all the distractions they may feel empty inside. But Buddhism teaches that awareness transforms fear. The moment you stop running from your inner world and begin observing it consciously, your relationship with yourself slowly changes. You realize that emotions are not enemies, thoughts are not permanent truths. Pain is not your identity. Loneliness is not proof that you are broken. And slowly, fear loses some of its power over you. Most people spend years trying to escape uncomfortable emotions, but conscious awareness teaches you how to remain present with them without becoming destroyed by them. This creates emotional strength. Not aggressive strength, but calm inner resilience. The kind of strength that allows you to sit with discomfort without instantly escaping into distraction. This is rare, because most people are addicted to avoidance. They avoid silence because silence reveals truth. But truth is necessary for transformation. You cannot heal what you refuse to face. This is why self-awareness is one of the most powerful forms of freedom. The more deeply you understand yourself, the less controlled you become by unconscious behavior. You begin noticing when you are chasing validation to fill emotional emptiness. You begin noticing when fear is controlling your decisions. You begin noticing when attachment is creating suffering. And once awareness appears, you gain the ability to choose differently. This changes your entire life. You stop blindly repeating destructive patterns. You stop abandoning yourself for approval. You stop depending on distractions to survive emotionally. Because your connection with yourself becomes stronger. And this connection creates peace. Many people think peace means escaping pain completely. But Buddhism teaches that peace comes from changing your relationship with pain. When you stop resisting every uncomfortable emotion, suffering softens. When you stop running from yourself, healing begins. When you stop needing constant distraction, awareness deepens. And awareness changes the quality of your life completely. Most people never experience deep peace because their mind is constantly escaping reality. They are mentally trapped in regrets about the past or anxieties about the future. They avoid the present moment because they are uncomfortable within themselves. But the present moment becomes less frightening when you stop fighting your own inner world. This is why mindfulness matters so deeply in Buddhism. Mindfulness brings you back to yourself, back to this breath, this moment, this awareness. And slowly, you begin realizing something beautiful. You no longer need to constantly run from yourself anymore. Because the more conscious you become, the more emotionally safe you begin feeling within your own presence. This creates inner stability, and inner stability changes everything. You stop depending on other people to constantly rescue you emotionally. You stop needing endless stimulation just to avoid emptiness. You stop searching everywhere outside yourself for peace that can only truly grow within. Because the relationship with yourself begins healing. And once this relationship heals, life begins feeling different, calmer, lighter, more honest, more peaceful. Many people spend years trying to escape pain without realizing that the real freedom comes from learning how to face themselves honestly, not with judgment, not with shame, but with awareness and compassion. This is what Buddhism teaches so deeply, not self-hatred, not perfection, but conscious understanding. The moment you stop running from yourself, your awareness deepens. And the deeper your awareness becomes, the less controlled you become by unconscious fears, emotional dependency, and external distractions. This is real inner freedom. Not becoming someone else, but finally becoming fully present with yourself. Most people are searching for peace everywhere except within their own mind. But no external place, person, or achievement can permanently calm a mind that remains disconnected from itself. This is why the journey inward matters so much. Because eventually, life forces every person to face themselves. The distractions quiet down, the noise fades, the external validation loses meaning. And at the end of everything, the relationship you have with your own mind becomes the most important relationship in your life. So the question is not whether you can keep escaping yourself forever. The real question is, can you finally become honest enough to stop running and truly meet yourself for the first time? Because the moment you stop escaping yourself, your real healing finally begins. 14. The more you understand impermanence, the less you suffer. One of the deepest truths Buddhism teaches is that everything in life changes. Nothing remains permanent forever. Emotions change. Relationships change. People change. Circumstances change. Success changes. Pain changes. Even your own thoughts, identity, and body continue changing every moment. Yet despite this reality, most people spend their lives emotionally attached to things as if they will last forever. They cling to people, outcomes, expectations, and versions of life that were never permanent to begin with. And when life inevitably changes, they suffer deeply because the mind resists accepting what has already changed. This is why Buddhism teaches that attachment creates suffering, not because love, relationships, or success are wrong, but because people often expect permanence from an impermanent world. And this expectation creates emotional pain. Most people suffer not only because they lose things, but because they believed those things would stay forever. They become emotionally attached to certain people remaining in their life permanently, attached to situations never changing, attached to specific outcomes unfolding exactly the way they imagined. But life does not obey attachment. Life continues changing whether the mind accepts it or not, and the more tightly you cling to permanence, the more painful change becomes. Many people spend years emotionally fighting reality because they cannot accept impermanence. They replay the past endlessly. They obsess over people who left. They refuse to let go of situations that already ended. And because they mentally resist change, suffering becomes prolonged. Buddhism teaches that pain is part of life, but attachment often transforms pain into long-term suffering. There is a difference. Pain is natural. Loss is natural. Change is natural. But suffering often increases because the mind refuses to release attachment. This should not have ended. They should still be here. My life should still look the same. This pain should disappear immediately. These thoughts create resistance, and resistance creates emotional suffering. Most people fear impermanence because they fear losing control. They want certainty, predictability, emotional security. They want guarantees that people will never leave, situations will never change, and pain will never appear. But life cannot offer these guarantees, and the more desperately the mind demands certainty from life, the more anxious and emotionally fragile it becomes. This is why awareness of impermanence creates wisdom. The more deeply you understand that everything changes, the less shocked you become when change appears. You stop expecting life to remain frozen in one perfect moment forever. You stop emotionally collapsing every time reality shifts, because you begin understanding that change is not the enemy of life. Change is life itself. The seasons change. The weather changes, the body changes, the mind changes. Every moment of existence is already transforming continuously. Yet most people mentally cling to what is already disappearing. This creates enormous emotional exhaustion. Many people lose years of peace trying to hold on to things that were never meant to stay forever. They cling to old identities, old relationships, old pain, old versions of themselves. They fear letting go because attachment creates the illusion of emotional safety. But attachment often becomes a prison, because the tighter you cling, the more fear you feel about losing. This is why deeply attached people often live with constant anxiety. They fear rejection, fear abandonment, fear failure, fear uncertainty, fear change itself. Their peace depends on life remaining predictable and emotionally comfortable. But life was never designed to remain predictable forever. Buddhism teaches that real peace does not come from controlling change. It comes from learning how to flow with change, consciously. This changes your entire relationship with life. You stop expecting permanent happiness from temporary experiences. You stop expecting people to always remain the same. You stop believing difficult emotions will last forever. Because awareness of impermanence reminds you that everything eventually passes. This understanding creates emotional balance. When painful moments arrive, you stop believing suffering will define your entire future forever. You begin understanding that emotions rise and fall naturally. Even intense sadness eventually shifts. Even difficult seasons eventually change. And this awareness creates hope. Not blind optimism, but deep understanding. The understanding that life never remains frozen permanently in one emotional state. Most people become emotionally trapped because they identify too strongly with temporary experiences. If they experience failure, they believe they are failures. If they experience heartbreak, they believe their life is ruined forever. If they experience emotional pain, they believe peace will never return. But Buddhism teaches that experiences are temporary visitors, not permanent identities. This changes the way you experience suffering. You stop seeing painful moments as permanent definitions of yourself. You stop becoming consumed by temporary emotions. You stop drowning inside every difficult season. Because awareness reminds you this too will change. Impermanence also teaches gratitude. Most people take life for granted because they unconsciously assume they have endless time, endless opportunities, endless moments with loved ones, endless chances to finally become present and appreciate life. But impermanence reminds you that nothing is guaranteed forever. Not youth, not health, not relationships, not time. And once you deeply understand this, your relationship with life becomes more conscious. You begin appreciating simple moments more deeply. Conversations become more meaningful. Presence becomes more valuable. Love becomes more honest. Because awareness of impermanence removes the illusion that life lasts forever. This creates urgency to live more consciously. Many people postpone peace, postpone happiness, postpone authenticity. They constantly think, one day I will finally live fully. One day I will slow down. One day I will appreciate life. But Buddhism teaches that life is fragile and uncertain. Tomorrow is never fully guaranteed. And once this truth truly enters the heart, awareness deepens. You stop wasting as much energy on meaningless conflict. You stop carrying unnecessary resentment. You stop postponing inner peace. Because you realize how temporary everything truly is. This understanding also changes your relationship with attachment to people. Many people try to emotionally possess others. They become terrified of losing relationships because they unconsciously believe love means control and permanence. But Buddhism teaches that love becomes healthier when attachment softens. True love is not ownership. True love understands impermanence. It appreciates people while accepting that everything changes eventually. This creates healthier emotional connection, not coldness, not emotional detachment in the unhealthy sense, but conscious love without desperate control. Most suffering in relationships comes from fear of loss. People become emotionally anxious because they desperately try to guarantee permanence in a world where permanence does not exist. But awareness changes this. The more conscious you become, the more peacefully you begin accepting uncertainty. You stop trying to emotionally imprison life. You begin appreciating moments instead of desperately clinging to them. And this creates emotional freedom. Impermanence also weakens ego. Most people become overly attached to status, appearance, success, and identity because they unconsciously believe these things define who they are permanently. But everything external eventually changes. Beauty fades, money changes, status changes, opinions change, life circumstances change. And once you deeply understand this truth, ego begins softening. You stop building your entire identity around temporary things. You stop becoming completely emotionally destroyed by external change. Because awareness teaches you that nothing external was ever fully permanent to begin with. This creates inner stability. Many people fear impermanence because they misunderstand it. They think impermanence only means loss. But impermanence also makes healing possible. If everything remained permanently fixed, pain would never end. But because life changes continuously, suffering also changes. Heartbreak softens. Grief evolves. Pain transforms. The mind heals. This is why impermanence contains both sadness and hope. Pain does not stay forever. Neither do difficult seasons. And this understanding creates emotional resilience. You stop becoming hopeless during painful moments because you understand that life continues moving. Change eventually arrives even when the mind cannot yet imagine it. Most people emotionally suffer because they resist change instead of learning how to move with it consciously. But Buddhism teaches flow instead of resistance, awareness instead of attachment, presence instead of control. And this transforms your inner world. You stop clinging so tightly to things that were never permanent. You stop mentally fighting reality every time life changes. You stop expecting certainty from an uncertain world, and slowly your mind becomes lighter, calmer, more accepting, more peaceful. Because the more deeply you understand impermanence, the less fear controls your life. You stop taking moments for granted. You stop postponing peace. You stop emotionally clinging to everything so desperately. Instead, you begin living more consciously, more presently, more honestly. You appreciate life while understanding its temporary nature. And this awareness creates wisdom, not sadness, not hopelessness, but wisdom. Because once you truly understand that everything changes, you stop wasting your life trying to emotionally hold on to what was never meant to last forever, and instead of constantly fearing change, you begin learning how to live peacefully within it. 15. The moment you stop chasing, you begin finding peace. Most people spend their entire lives chasing something, chasing approval, chasing validation, chasing success, chasing attention, chasing relationships, chasing perfection, chasing happiness. And because the mind constantly believes peace exists somewhere outside the present moment, people remain emotionally restless almost all the time. Buddhism teaches that much of human suffering comes from endless craving. The mind constantly tells people that they will finally feel complete once they achieve one more thing, receive one more form of validation, gain one more success, or become one more version of themselves. But even after achieving what they wanted, the peace rarely lasts. The excitement fades. The satisfaction fades. And soon, the mind begins chasing something else again. This creates an endless cycle of emotional dissatisfaction. Because the problem was never the lack of external achievement. The problem was the restless mind itself. Most people do not know how to simply be present with life. Their mind is always reaching for the next thing. Even during moments of peace, they struggle to fully enjoy what they already have, because they are mentally focused on what is missing. This is why many people feel emotionally exhausted, despite constantly moving forward. Their body keeps chasing while their soul remains empty. Buddhism teaches that craving creates suffering because the mind becomes attached to the belief that happiness only exists in the future. I will finally feel peaceful when I get this. I will finally feel enough when this happens. I will finally feel complete when someone chooses me. But this mindset keeps peace permanently out of reach. Because the mind never learns how to rest. It constantly searches, constantly compares, constantly desires, constantly feels incomplete. And this endless inner hunger creates emotional suffering. Many people spend years chasing relationships because they believe another person will finally heal the emptiness inside them. They become emotionally attached to attention, validation, and affection because deep down they do not feel whole within themselves. But Buddhism teaches that emotional dependency cannot create lasting peace. If you depend entirely on external things to feel valuable, your peace becomes fragile. The moment those things disappear, your emotional stability disappears too. This is why so many people suffer deeply after rejection, abandonment, or loss. Their identity became emotionally attached to something temporary, and when life changed, they felt lost inside themselves. But awareness changes this relationship completely. The more conscious you become, the more you begin understanding that constant chasing often comes from inner emptiness, fear, and emotional attachment. You begin noticing how restless the mind becomes when it believes the present moment is not enough. And this awareness creates wisdom, because once you understand the pattern clearly, you stop blindly obeying it. Most people are addicted to emotional chasing. They chase people who barely value them, chase approval from strangers, chase impossible standards, chase attention on social media, chase success without ever slowing down to ask themselves if the chase is even making them peaceful anymore. And slowly, life becomes emotionally exhausting, because endless chasing disconnects people from the present moment. Buddhism teaches that peace cannot grow inside a mind constantly running toward the future. The present moment becomes invisible because the mind is always focused on what it still does not have. This creates permanent dissatisfaction. No achievement feels enough. No amount of praise feels enough. No success feels enough, because the restless mind immediately moves the goalpost again. This is why many externally successful people still feel emotionally empty. They achieved many things but never learned how to feel peaceful within themselves. And without inner peace, external success alone cannot fully satisfy the soul. Most people believe stopping the chase means giving up on life. But Buddhism teaches something different. It teaches non-attachment, not laziness. You can still have goals, dreams, love, ambition and purpose without emotionally attaching your entire identity to outcomes. This creates healthier energy. You work without destroying your peace. You love without becoming emotionally imprisoned. You pursue goals without believing they define your worth. And this changes everything internally, because the moment your happiness stops depending entirely on external outcomes, the mind becomes lighter, calmer, less desperate, less anxious. Most emotional suffering comes from attachment to specific outcomes. I need this person to choose me. I need this success to feel valuable. I need this future to happen exactly the way I imagined. And when reality unfolds differently, suffering appears because attachment created emotional dependence. But Buddhism teaches that peace grows when attachment softens, not because you stop caring, but because you stop emotionally clinging. This creates freedom. Most people are terrified of letting go because they believe attachment equals love, passion, or motivation. But unhealthy attachment often creates fear instead of peace. Fear of losing, fear of rejection, fear of uncertainty, fear of failure, fear of not being enough, and fear destroys inner calm. But awareness weakens attachment. The more conscious you become, the more you realize that constantly chasing validation, outcomes, and emotional certainty only creates inner exhaustion. You begin understanding that peace is not found through endless striving. Peace is found through inner alignment. This changes your relationship with yourself. You stop needing constant external proof to feel valuable. You stop overworking yourself just to feel worthy. You stop begging for love from emotionally unavailable people. You stop exhausting yourself, trying to force life to unfold according to your timeline. And slowly, your nervous system begins calming down, because the mind is no longer constantly running. Many people do not realize how addicted they are to emotional stimulation. Silence feels uncomfortable to them because stillness forces them to face themselves, so they constantly chase distraction, attention, and excitement to avoid inner emptiness. But Buddhism teaches that stillness is where peace begins, not in endless chasing, not in constant consumption, not in emotional desperation, but in awareness. The moment you stop constantly running after fulfillment outside yourself, you begin reconnecting with the peace already available within you. This is why mindfulness matters so deeply. Mindfulness brings the mind back to the present moment, back to this breath, this moment, this experience. And slowly, the restless energy inside the mind softens. You begin appreciating simple things again. Silence, nature, breathing, presence, connection. Life stops feeling like a non-stop race, And instead of constantly asking, "What am I missing?" you begin appreciating what already exists. This creates gratitude, and gratitude weakens craving. Most people are emotionally trapped because they believe they are incomplete without certain people, achievements, or circumstances. But Buddhism teaches that peace begins when you stop searching outside yourself for what can only truly grow within. This does not mean you stop loving people or pursuing meaningful goals. It means you stop turning external things into emotional requirements for your worth and peace. There is a huge difference. You stop needing everyone to approve of you. Stop needing constant reassurance. Stop needing life to unfold perfectly. And because of this, emotional freedom begins growing inside you. The more peaceful you become internally, the less desperate your energy becomes externally. You stop chasing people who constantly run from you. You stop forcing connections that destroy your peace. You stop trying to prove your value endlessly. Because you finally understand something deeply important, what is truly meant for you does not require you to destroy yourself emotionally to keep it. This realization changes your relationships completely. You begin choosing peace over obsession, presence over overthinking, inner stability over emotional chaos. And slowly life feels different, softer, lighter, more grounded, because the mind is no longer constantly fighting for fulfillment outside itself. Most people never experience deep peace because they spend their whole life emotionally running toward the future, running toward approval, running away from loneliness, running away from themselves. But eventually, the soul becomes tired of endless striving, tired of emotional chasing, tired of constantly trying to earn worth through external things. And this exhaustion often becomes the beginning of awakening, because at some point, people begin realizing, no matter how much I chase, peace still feels missing. And this realization becomes powerful, because it finally turns attention inward. Back toward awareness, back toward presence, back toward the relationship with the mind itself. Buddhism teaches that true peace is not found by endlessly chasing life. It is found by learning how to fully experience life without becoming emotionally imprisoned by craving and attachment. This creates deep, inner freedom. You still move forward, still grow, still love, still dream, but you stop desperately clinging to outcomes, as if your entire identity depends on them. And this changes the quality of your life completely, because the moment you stop constantly chasing peace outside yourself, you finally create space to experience peace within yourself. And that is where real freedom begins. 16. Your peace returns the moment you stop fighting yourself. One of the deepest battles many people fight is not with the world. It is with themselves. They constantly criticize themselves, judge themselves, compare themselves, reject themselves. And because this inner conflict never truly stops, peace slowly disappears from their life. Most people do not realize how much emotional suffering is created by self-conflict. Their mind becomes a place of constant pressure, shame, fear, and unrealistic expectations. Even when nobody else is attacking them, they continue attacking themselves internally. You are not good enough. You are behind in life. You should be more successful by now. You should not feel this way. You should already have everything figured out. These thoughts create emotional exhaustion. And because people repeat these mental patterns every day, they begin believing them completely. Buddhism teaches that suffering often increases when the mind becomes trapped in resistance and self-judgment. Many people believe peace will come after they finally become perfect. Perfect appearance, perfect success, perfect emotions, perfect life. But perfection never arrives. And because the mind constantly demands more from itself, people remain emotionally dissatisfied no matter how much they achieve. This creates endless inner pressure. Many people are physically safe but mentally exhausted because their own mind never allows them to rest. Even during moments of success, they continue feeling inadequate. Even after achieving goals, they continue feeling incomplete. Even while receiving love, they continue feeling unworthy. Because the real problem was never external, it was the relationship they had with themselves. Buddhism teaches that awareness and compassion are necessary for healing, but most people give themselves neither. They constantly expect themselves to function like machines without emotional struggle. They treat their own humanity like weakness. They become ashamed of fear, ashamed of sadness, ashamed of loneliness, ashamed of imperfection. And because they resist their emotions instead of understanding them, suffering deepens. Most people do not know how to simply sit with themselves peacefully. The moment difficult emotions appear, they immediately judge themselves. If I feel anxious, something must be wrong with me. If I feel lost, I must be failing. If I struggle emotionally, I must be weak. But Buddhism teaches that emotions are part of being human. Fear, sadness, confusion, uncertainty, and pain are natural experiences within life. The problem is not the emotion itself. The problem is the war people create against their own emotions. This inner resistance creates suffering. Many people spend years trying to escape uncomfortable emotions instead of learning how to understand them consciously. They distract themselves constantly because they are uncomfortable facing their inner world honestly. But avoidance never creates peace. Temporary distraction may numb pain for a moment, but unresolved suffering always returns eventually. This is why so many people feel emotionally exhausted despite constantly chasing pleasure, entertainment, validation, and distraction. Nothing fully heals them because the mind itself remains in conflict. Buddhism teaches that peace begins the moment you stop turning your own mind into an enemy. This changes everything internally. Instead of constantly attacking yourself, you begin observing yourself with awareness. Instead of hating your emotions, you begin understanding them. Instead of demanding perfection, you begin accepting your humanity. And this creates emotional healing. Most people are deeply harsh toward themselves because they were taught that self-criticism creates growth. They believe constant pressure, comparison, and self-judgment will force them to become better. But endless self-hatred never creates true peace. It only creates fear and emotional exhaustion. A mind constantly attacking itself cannot fully rest. This is why self-compassion matters so deeply. Not self-pity, not avoiding responsibility, but conscious compassion toward your own humanity. Buddhism teaches that awareness without compassion becomes coldness, and compassion without awareness becomes blindness. True healing requires both. You become honest about your patterns while still treating yourself with understanding instead of hatred. This creates balance. Most people are trying to heal while secretly hating themselves at the same time, and this creates inner contradiction. They want peace while constantly feeding self-rejection. They want confidence while constantly insulting themselves internally. They want healing while refusing to accept their own humanity. But peace cannot grow in a mind constantly at war with itself. This is why acceptance matters so much. Acceptance does not mean giving up on growth. It means ending the unnecessary hatred toward yourself while growing. There is a huge difference. Many people believe they must constantly punish themselves emotionally to improve. But Buddhism teaches that awareness creates transformation more effectively than self-hatred. The more consciously you observe yourself, the more naturally growth begins happening. Because awareness creates understanding, and understanding creates change. Most suffering comes from unconscious identification with thoughts. People believe every negative thought their mind creates. I am worthless. I will never change. I am broken. I am failing. But thoughts are not always truth. The mind creates fear constantly, creates comparison constantly, creates insecurity constantly. And when people become fully identified with these mental patterns, suffering deepens. Buddhism teaches mindfulness because mindfulness creates distance between awareness and thought. You begin observing thoughts instead of blindly obeying them. And this changes your relationship with the mind completely. You stop becoming emotionally destroyed by every negative thought that appears. You begin understanding that thoughts rise and fall like clouds. Emotions rise and fall like weather. Nothing remains permanent forever. This creates inner space. And inside that space, peace begins returning. Most people also suffer because they compare themselves endlessly to others. They compare success, appearance, relationships, achievements, healing, and progress. And because comparison constantly focuses attention on what is missing, gratitude disappears. Comparison creates emotional emptiness. Because no matter how much you achieve, someone else will always appear ahead in some way. Buddhism teaches presence instead of comparison. Your path is your path. Your healing is your healing. Your life is your life. The moment you stop constantly measuring your worth against everyone else, emotional pressure softens. You begin reconnecting with your own journey instead of constantly feeling behind. And this creates peace. Many people are also emotionally exhausted because they never allow themselves to simply be human. They believe they must always be strong, productive, confident, emotionally stable, and successful. But human beings are not machines. There will be difficult days, confusing seasons, emotional struggles, moments of uncertainty. And Buddhism teaches that suffering increases when you resist your humanity instead of accepting it consciously. This does not mean staying stuck forever. It means understanding that healing and growth require patience. Many people become frustrated with themselves because they want instant transformation. They want to heal immediately, become peaceful immediately, stop suffering immediately. But inner healing often moves slowly, and the mind suffers more when it fights this process. Buddhism teaches patience with the self, patience during healing, patience during growth, patience during confusion. This patience creates emotional softness instead of inner violence, and slowly the nervous system begins calming down, because the mind no longer feels constantly attacked. Most people underestimate how deeply self-conflict affects their life. A person can achieve external success while secretly feeling emotionally drained because they never learned how to exist peacefully within themselves. But external achievement cannot replace inner peace. A person can gain money and still hate themselves, gain attention and still feel empty, gain success and still feel emotionally exhausted. Because inner peace is not created externally. It is created through the relationship you have with your own mind. This is why awareness changes everything. The more conscious you become, the more clearly you begin noticing how often you fight yourself unnecessarily. You notice how harshly you speak to yourself internally, how often you reject your emotions, how often fear controls your identity. And once awareness appears, healing becomes possible. You stop treating yourself like an enemy. You stop expecting impossible perfection. You stop punishing yourself for being human. And slowly, something beautiful begins happening. Your mind softens. Your nervous system relaxes. Your inner world becomes quieter. Not because life became perfect, but because you stopped attacking yourself constantly. This changes your entire experience of life. You become calmer during mistakes, more patient during growth, more compassionate during emotional struggles. You stop collapsing every time you experience discomfort, because you understand that difficult emotions are temporary experiences, not proof that something is wrong with your existence. This awareness creates resilience, real emotional resilience, not fake positivity, not emotional suppression, but conscious inner stability. The kind of stability that allows you to experience life without constantly destroying yourself mentally. Buddhism teaches that peace is not found by becoming someone completely different. Peace is found when the mind stops fighting reality, stops fighting emotions, and stops fighting itself constantly. And eventually, you begin realizing something deeply powerful. You were never meant to spend your entire life at war with your own mind. Because the moment you stop fighting yourself, your peace finally has space to return. 17. The more you let go, the lighter your soul becomes. Most people carry too much inside themselves. Too much anger, too much resentment, too much regret, too much attachment, too much fear, too many painful memories they refuse to release. And because they continue holding on to emotional weight for years, their mind slowly becomes exhausted. Even when life appears normal on the outside, something inside them constantly feels heavy. Buddhism teaches that attachment is one of the deepest causes of suffering. The mind clings to people, pain, expectations, identities and memories because it fears letting go. It believes holding on creates safety, but often holding on only prolongs emotional suffering. Many people spend years emotionally attached to things that already ended, old relationships, old pain, old rejection, old guilt, old versions of themselves. And because they mentally relive these experiences again and again, the suffering never fully leaves them. The body moves forward through time, but the mind remains trapped in the past. This creates emotional heaviness. Most people do not realize how much energy unresolved attachment consumes. Every unresolved resentment silently drains peace. Every emotional wound constantly replayed in the mind keeps the nervous system trapped in stress. Every fear of loss creates anxiety, and slowly the soul becomes tired. Buddhism teaches that peace becomes impossible when the mind constantly clings to what it refuses to release. This is why letting go matters so deeply, not because forgetting is easy, not because pain disappears instantly, but because carrying emotional suffering forever slowly destroys inner peace. Many people fear letting go because they misunderstand it. They think letting go means pretending nothing mattered, pretending they were never hurt, pretending loss did not affect them. But Buddhism teaches something much deeper. Letting go is not denial, it is acceptance. It is the willingness to stop mentally fighting reality endlessly. Most suffering comes from resistance. This should not have happened, they should not have left, my life should have gone differently. These thoughts keep the mind emotionally trapped. Reality already happened. But the mind continues resisting what already exists, and this creates prolonged suffering. Many people become emotionally attached to pain because pain becomes part of their identity. They replay betrayal repeatedly, replay rejection repeatedly, replay painful memories constantly. And because the mind keeps feeding emotional wounds, healing never fully begins. The wound stays emotionally alive. Buddhism teaches that awareness heals suffering, but attachment feeds suffering. The more tightly you cling to emotional pain, the heavier your inner world becomes. This is why conscious release creates freedom, not immediate perfection, but freedom from constantly reopening the same emotional wounds. Many people carry resentment for years without realizing how deeply it poisons their peace. They mentally argue with people who are no longer even present. They replay old conversations endlessly. They fantasize about revenge, justice, or emotional closure. But while doing this, they unknowingly imprison themselves emotionally. Because resentment hurts the person carrying it most. Buddhism teaches compassion, not because harmful behavior is acceptable, but because hatred destroys inner peace. The mind filled with resentment cannot fully rest. This does not mean allowing toxic people to continue harming you. It means refusing to let hatred permanently live inside your heart. There is a difference. Many people think holding on to anger makes them strong, but often it only keeps them emotionally attached to suffering. Real strength is learning how to release what no longer serves your peace. This applies not only to people, but also to identities. Many people remain attached to old versions of themselves, old mistakes, old shame, old guilt, old failures. They continue defining themselves by things that happened years ago. Even after life changes, the mind continues carrying outdated emotional stories. I ruined everything, I am still broken, I will never change. These beliefs create emotional imprisonment. But Buddhism teaches impermanence. Everything changes, including you. The person you were years ago is not fully the person you are now. Growth happens continuously. Healing happens continuously. Awareness evolves continuously. But many people never allow themselves to move forward because they remain emotionally attached to old identities. This attachment blocks transformation. The mind keeps saying, "This is who I am." And because of this, people continue repeating suffering patterns unconsciously. But awareness changes this. The more conscious you become, the more you realize that holding on to old pain does not protect you. It only exhausts you. This realization creates emotional maturity. You begin asking yourself, what am I still carrying that no longer serves my peace? This question changes everything. Because many people are emotionally drowning under things they no longer need to carry. Old guilt, old heartbreak, old fear, old expectations, old emotional attachments. And the longer they hold on to these things, the heavier life feels. Buddhism teaches that letting go creates inner space, space for peace, space for healing, space for clarity. Most people never experience deep peace because their inner world is overcrowded with unresolved emotional weight. The mind never rests because it constantly replays the past. But the past cannot be changed. This truth is painful for many people to accept, because the mind desperately wants to rewrite painful experiences. But no amount of overthinking changes what already happened. This is why acceptance matters so deeply. Acceptance does not mean approval. It means ending the endless mental resistance against reality. And this changes your relationship with suffering completely. You stop emotionally reliving pain every day. You stop reopening wounds unnecessarily. You stop carrying emotional burdens simply because they became familiar. And slowly, the nervous system begins calming down. Most people are addicted to emotional attachment without realizing it. Even painful emotions can become psychologically familiar. People cling to suffering because suffering becomes part of their identity. But Buddhism teaches freedom from attachment, not emotional numbness, not avoiding love, but freedom from clinging, freedom from emotional imprisonment, freedom from constantly defining your life through pain. This creates emotional lightness. And emotional lightness changes the quality of your entire existence. You breathe differently, think differently, feel differently. Life becomes less heavy internally. Many people also carry attachment to control. They cannot let go of expectations about how life should unfold. They become emotionally devastated whenever reality changes direction, but life is constantly changing. People leave, plans fail, seasons shift. Nothing remains fixed forever. The more tightly you cling to certainty, the more painful change becomes. But awareness softens attachment. You begin understanding that peace is not created through controlling everything perfectly. Peace is created through learning how to flow with life consciously instead of constantly resisting it. This creates flexibility inside the mind. And flexibility creates resilience. Most suffering comes from mental rigidity. This must happen exactly this way. This person must stay forever. My life must follow this timeline. But life rarely obeys rigid expectations completely. And when expectations collapse, suffering appears. But letting go softens this suffering. You stop demanding permanence from an impermanent world. You stop emotionally gripping life so tightly. And slowly, fear loses some of its control over you. Because attachment and fear are deeply connected. The more attached you become, the more afraid you become of loss. But awareness creates trust, not blind trust that life will always feel comfortable, but trust that you can survive change without losing yourself completely. This changes your entire relationship with uncertainty. You stop clinging desperately to everything. You begin appreciating life without trying to emotionally possess it. This creates gratitude instead of fear. Most people are also carrying emotional expectations from others that continuously destroy their peace. They expect everyone to understand them, value them, behave correctly, and meet emotional needs perfectly. But human beings are imperfect. And the more unrealistic expectations you carry, the more disappointment controls your emotional life. Buddhism teaches compassion toward imperfection, toward yourself, toward others, toward life itself, because perfection does not exist in the human experience. This awareness softens emotional suffering. You stop expecting impossible certainty from people and life, and because of this, emotional pressure decreases. Many people are exhausted not because life is unbearable, but because they are mentally carrying too much attachment, too much resentment, too much fear, too much emotional resistance. But peace returns when emotional weight is released consciously. This is why mindfulness matters so deeply. Mindfulness helps you observe what you are carrying internally. It helps you notice how attachment affects the mind, how resentment affects the heart, how fear affects the nervous system. And once awareness appears, conscious release becomes possible. You stop carrying unnecessary emotional burdens simply because they became familiar. This changes your inner world completely. You begin feeling lighter emotionally, calmer mentally, more present spiritually. Because the soul was never meant to spend its entire existence trapped under endless emotional weight. Buddhism teaches that freedom is not found by controlling life perfectly. Freedom is found when the mind stops clinging so desperately to everything. And eventually, something beautiful begins happening. You stop trying to emotionally possess every experience. You stop mentally reliving the past every day. You stop defining yourself through pain and attachment. And slowly, peace begins returning naturally. Not because life became perfect, but because your mind finally learned how to release what was destroying it. Because the more you let go, the lighter your soul becomes. 18. The more present you become, the less fear controls your life. Most people are physically alive in the present moment, but mentally they are somewhere else. Their mind is trapped in the past, replaying mistakes, replaying heartbreak, replaying painful memories. Or their mind is trapped in the future, worrying, overthinking, imagining worst-case scenarios, fearing things that have not even happened yet. And because the mind rarely stays fully present, peace slowly disappears from life. Buddhism teaches that much of human suffering comes from mental attachment to the past and fear of the future. The mind constantly moves away from the only moment where life is actually happening, the present moment. This creates emotional exhaustion. Most people spend their entire lives mentally somewhere else. Even during beautiful moments, they are distracted by fear, anxiety, regret, comparison, and overthinking. They eat without truly tasting food, listen without truly hearing people, live without fully experiencing life, because the mind never stops running. This is why so many people feel emotionally disconnected from life itself. Their nervous system remains trapped in survival mode. Their mind constantly searches for danger, uncertainty, and problems to solve. Even when nothing terrible is happening, they remain mentally restless because fear has become a habit. Buddhism teaches that fear often survives through imagination. The mind imagines future pain repeatedly. What if I fail? What if they leave? What if my future falls apart? What if I lose everything? And because these fearful thoughts repeat constantly, the body begins reacting as if imagined suffering is already real. This creates anxiety. Many people are emotionally suffering from things that have not even happened. The mind creates entire emotional storms through future imagination alone. And because people become fully identified with these thoughts, fear begins controlling their life decisions. They avoid opportunities, avoid honesty, avoid risks, avoid growth, avoid change. Not because danger is always real, but because fear convinces them it is. Buddhism teaches awareness because awareness weakens unconscious fear. The more present you become, the less power imagined futures have over your mind. Because fear usually lives in the future, but peace exists in the present. This is why mindfulness matters so deeply. Mindfulness brings attention back to this moment, this breath, this experience, this reality. And slowly, the mind begins calming down. Most people are addicted to overthinking without realizing it. They believe constant mental activity protects them. They think if they analyze every possible future problem, they will finally feel safe. But overthinking rarely creates peace. It creates exhaustion. Because the mind was never designed to carry endless imagined scenarios all day long. Many people mentally fight battles that never even happen. They create fear inside themselves repeatedly. And because they remain disconnected from the present moment, they miss life while trying to mentally control the future. This is why awareness changes everything. The more conscious you become, the more clearly you begin noticing how often the mind leaves the present moment unnecessarily. You notice how much suffering is created by mental projection instead of actual reality. And this realization becomes powerful because most fears lose strength when brought fully into conscious awareness. Many people also remain trapped in the past. They replay old mistakes repeatedly and continue punishing themselves emotionally for things that already happened years ago. This should not have happened. I should have done better. My life should look different by now. And because the mind constantly relives old pain, emotional suffering continues. But Buddhism teaches impermanence. The past no longer exists except inside memory. Yet many people emotionally live there every day. This creates deep inner heaviness. The present moment becomes invisible because attention remains trapped in what already ended. This is why awareness of the present creates healing. The more present you become, the less emotional control the past has over your life. You stop reliving old pain constantly. You stop defining yourself entirely through previous mistakes and experiences. Because awareness reminds you, life is happening now, not yesterday, not inside imagined futures. now. This realization changes your relationship with existence completely. You begin noticing simple moments again, the feeling of breathing, the sound of nature, conversations, silence, sunlight, stillness. Life becomes more vivid because the mind stops constantly escaping the present moment. Most people believe peace will finally arrive once they solve every problem in the future. But Buddhism teaches that peace is not found in a future moment. Peace is practiced now. And this is difficult for many people to accept, because the mind constantly believes happiness exists somewhere ahead. When I finally achieve this, when life becomes easier, when I fix everything, then peace will arrive. But this mindset keeps peace permanently delayed, because the future never fully arrives the way the mind imagines. And even when goals are achieved, the restless mind quickly creates new fears and desires again. This is why mindfulness is liberation from mental restlessness. You stop constantly postponing life. You stop waiting for perfect conditions to finally feel peaceful. You stop mentally abandoning the present moment for imagined futures. And slowly, the nervous system relaxes. Most anxiety comes from mental time travel. The mind leaves reality and enters imagined scenarios repeatedly. But the body can only exist here, now, this moment. And when awareness returns to the present, fear often weakens naturally, because right now, many imagined fears do not actually exist in immediate reality. They exist inside thought. This is why Buddhism teaches observation of the mind instead of blind identification with thought. Most people believe every fearful thought automatically. If my mind imagines disaster, disaster must be coming. But thoughts are not always truth. The mind constantly creates possibilities, fears, projections, and emotional stories. Awareness allows you to observe these thoughts without becoming emotionally consumed by them. This creates emotional space. And emotional space creates freedom. Most people are controlled by fear because they react automatically to every anxious thought. They never pause long enough to question whether the fear is even real in the present moment. But conscious awareness creates calm observation. You begin noticing, my mind is imagining suffering right now. My fear is projecting into the future. This thought is creating anxiety inside me. And this awareness weakens emotional identification. Fear survives through unconscious belief, but awareness interrupts unconscious fear patterns. Many people also fear stillness because stillness removes distraction. The moment external stimulation disappears, the mind becomes loud. Unresolved fear, loneliness, insecurity, and emotional pain rise to the surface. So people constantly distract themselves, scrolling, watching, consuming, talking, working endlessly, anything to avoid sitting quietly with themselves. But Buddhism teaches that stillness is necessary for inner peace, because without stillness, awareness cannot deepen. And without awareness, unconscious fear continues controlling life. The more present you become, the more you begin understanding your own mind. You notice emotional triggers more clearly. You notice fear patterns more clearly. You notice how attachment creates anxiety. And slowly, your relationship with fear changes. You stop seeing fear as absolute truth. You begin seeing it as a temporary mental experience. This creates emotional resilience, not because fear disappears completely, but because fear stops controlling every decision you make. Many people spend their entire lives waiting to feel completely fearless before living fully. But fearlessness is not the goal of Buddhism. Awareness is. Because even fearful thoughts can exist without controlling your identity. You can feel uncertainty and still remain present. Feel discomfort and still remain conscious. Feel fear and still continue moving forward wisely. This is real strength, not emotional numbness. but conscious presence during emotional experience. Most suffering becomes amplified because the mind immediately resists discomfort. This feeling should not exist. I should not feel anxious. I must escape this emotion immediately. But resistance often increases emotional suffering. Awareness softens it. You begin observing emotions without instantly fighting them, and this changes your nervous system completely. The body begins relaxing because the mind is no longer constantly fighting reality. Most people underestimate how deeply present awareness transforms life. A present mind experiences reality more fully. Food tastes richer. Conversations feel deeper. Nature feels more alive. Simple moments become meaningful again, because attention returns to reality instead of endless mental noise. Buddhism teaches that life itself unfolds only in the present moment, not inside mental replay, not inside future imagination. Now, this moment is life, and many people miss it completely because fear constantly pulls attention elsewhere. But awareness brings you back to breathing, back to observing, back to living consciously. This creates deep inner peace, not because all problems disappear, but because the mind stops constantly abandoning the present moment for imagined suffering. And eventually, something beautiful begins happening. You stop living entirely through fear. You stop mentally running toward future disaster constantly. You stop emotionally reliving the past every day. And slowly, your mind becomes quieter, calmer, more grounded, more peaceful. Because the more present you become, the less power fear has over your life. And the less fear controls your life, the more fully you finally begin living. 19. You become dangerous when you no longer need external validation. Most people are emotionally controlled because they constantly need something from others. Approval, attention, recognition, acceptance, validation. And because they depend on these things emotionally, other people gain enormous power over their peace. A compliment can lift them emotionally. A criticism can destroy them emotionally. A little rejection can completely shake their confidence. This is why so many people secretly feel unstable inside. Their self-worth changes depending on how others respond to them. Buddhism teaches that attachment to external validation creates suffering because anything outside yourself is temporary and unpredictable. People change constantly. Opinions change constantly. Attention fades. Praise disappears. Relationships shift. And if your emotional stability depends entirely on external reactions, your peace becomes fragile. Most people spend their entire lives trying to feel enough through other people's approval. They want everyone to like them, understand them, choose them, admire them. And because they fear rejection deeply, they slowly abandon themselves to maintain acceptance. They stay quiet when they should speak honestly. They tolerate disrespect because they fear losing people. They over-explain themselves constantly. They shape their personality around what will be accepted. And slowly, they lose all connection with their authentic self. This creates emotional dependence. And emotional dependence makes people easy to manipulate. Manipulative people understand this very well. They know emotionally dependent people are easier to control because validation becomes a weapon, attention becomes a weapon, approval becomes a weapon. They give affection when they want control, withdraw attention to create insecurity, praise people to gain influence over them. And because emotionally dependent people are starving for validation, they tolerate unhealthy treatment just to avoid losing approval. This is why self-awareness is so powerful. The more deeply you understand yourself, the less desperate you become for external reassurance. You stop needing constant emotional permission to feel valuable. You stop chasing validation from people who barely understand themselves. And this changes your energy completely. You become calmer, more grounded, more emotionally stable, because your identity is no longer fully controlled by external opinions. This is what makes a person truly powerful. Not aggression, not ego, not dominance, but emotional independence. Most people are terrified of rejection because they secretly believe rejection decreases their value. If someone does not choose them, they feel worthless. If someone criticizes them, they question their identity completely. But Buddhism teaches that your worth does not disappear because another human being fails to recognize it. This realization creates enormous inner freedom. You stop trying to force everyone to understand you. You stop exhausting yourself, trying to prove your value constantly. You stop emotionally collapsing every time someone misunderstands you. Because you finally understand something deeply important, other people's opinions are not absolute truths about your worth. Most people never develop this understanding because they are emotionally conditioned from childhood to seek approval. They learn very early that acceptance feels emotionally safe, while rejection feels emotionally dangerous. So they spend years becoming whatever gains approval from others. This creates a false identity, a personality built around pleasing people instead of living honestly. And while this may create temporary acceptance, it slowly destroys inner peace because the soul becomes exhausted from pretending constantly. Buddhism teaches authenticity through awareness. The more conscious you become, the less willing you are to betray yourself just to fit into expectations. This changes your relationship with life completely. You stop needing to constantly impress people. You stop explaining yourself to everyone. You stop shaping your entire existence around avoiding criticism. And because of this, emotional freedom begins growing inside you. Most people underestimate how much energy they waste trying to control how others perceive them. They overthink conversations, overanalyze social interactions, constantly worry about judgment. Their mind becomes emotionally exhausted trying to manage everyone's opinion. But no human being can fully control how the world sees them. And trying to do so creates endless suffering. Because no matter how perfectly you behave, some people will still misunderstand you. Some people will dislike you. Some people will judge you unfairly. And if your peace depends on universal approval, peace will never arrive. Buddhism teaches non-attachment to praise and criticism because both are temporary. The mind becomes unstable when it constantly depends on external reactions for emotional security. This is why emotionally mature people become difficult to manipulate. They still appreciate love, kindness, and healthy relationships, but they are no longer emotionally dependent on external validation for survival. There is a huge difference. An emotionally dependent person constantly fears losing attention. An emotionally secure person values connection without losing themselves inside it. This creates calmness. Most people are emotionally reactive because they desperately need emotional reassurance all the time. If someone becomes distant, anxiety appears immediately. If approval disappears, insecurity appears immediately. But emotional independence weakens this cycle. You stop panicking every time external validation changes, because your inner stability no longer fully depends on outside reactions. This is why conscious people often appear calmer than others, not because they stopped caring about life, but because they stopped emotionally handing their worth to everyone around them. This creates enormous inner strength. Many people become emotionally trapped in unhealthy relationships because they fear being alone more than they value their peace. They tolerate disrespect, emotional inconsistency, manipulation, and dishonesty because they believe losing attention would hurt more than losing themselves. But Buddhism teaches that attachment without awareness creates suffering, and awareness eventually forces honesty. You begin realizing that Constantly sacrificing your peace for validation slowly destroys your soul. This realization changes your standards completely. You stop chasing people who only value you conditionally. You stop begging for emotional attention. You stop exhausting yourself trying to earn love from emotionally unavailable people. Because self-awareness helps you understand that your worth does not increase when someone chooses you, and it does not decrease when someone rejects you. This is emotional freedom. Most people never experience this freedom because they remain emotionally attached to external identity. Their sense of self depends entirely on achievements, relationships, social approval, and external recognition. But external identity is unstable. Careers change, relationships change, public opinion changes. And if your identity depends completely on unstable things, suffering becomes unavoidable. Buddhism teaches inner awareness because inner awareness creates stable peace. The more connected you become with yourself, the less external chaos controls your emotional state. This does not mean you stop appreciating connection. It means you stop needing constant validation to feel whole. And this changes your nervous system completely. You stop overthinking every interaction. Stop begging for reassurance constantly. Stop emotionally collapsing every time someone behaves unpredictably. Because inner security begins replacing emotional dependency. This creates a very different kind of presence, a calm presence, a grounded presence. A person who no longer desperately seeks approval becomes emotionally powerful because fear loses much of its control over them. Fear of rejection weakens. Fear of judgment weakens. Fear of misunderstanding weakens. And because fear weakens, authenticity becomes possible. Most people are not truly expressing themselves honestly. They are performing, adjusting constantly to gain acceptance. But performing is exhausting. The soul becomes tired of pretending. This is why so many people secretly feel emotionally drained even while appearing socially successful. Because living for approval disconnects people from themselves. But awareness reconnects you. You begin asking deeper questions. What do I actually believe? What genuinely brings me peace? What kind of life feels true to my soul? And these questions create authenticity. Buddhism teaches that inner peace grows when your life aligns with awareness instead of fear. The more honestly you live, the less internal conflict exists inside the mind. This creates emotional lightness. Many people also confuse confidence with arrogance, but true confidence is quiet. It does not desperately seek attention, because it no longer depends on attention for survival. A truly grounded person does not constantly need to prove themselves. They do not panic when ignored, do not collapse when criticized, do not chase validation endlessly, because their worth comes from inner awareness, not external applause. This is what makes them emotionally powerful, not superiority, not ego, but freedom from emotional dependency. Most manipulation only works when fear exists. Fear of rejection, fear of loneliness, fear of not being enough. But the more conscious you become, the less these fears control your behavior. And this changes your relationships completely. You stop tolerating disrespect just to avoid abandonment. You stop shrinking yourself to fit into expectations. You stop sacrificing your peace for temporary approval. Because you finally understand something deeply important. Real love does not require self-betrayal. Real connection does not require constant performance. And real peace cannot exist while your worth depends entirely on the unstable opinions of others. This realization changes the quality of your life completely. You become calmer during criticism, more authentic during relationships, more emotionally stable during uncertainty, because your identity is no longer constantly controlled by external reactions. And eventually, something powerful begins happening. You stop living for applause, stop living for approval, stop living in fear of rejection, and instead you begin living from awareness, from honesty, from inner stability, from peace. This is why emotionally independent people feel so powerful, not because they control others, but because they are no longer easily controlled by them, and the moment you stop desperately needing validation from the world loses much of its power over your mind. 20. Real freedom begins when you no longer fear being alone. One of the deepest fears many people carry is the fear of being alone. Not just physically alone, but emotionally alone. Unwanted, unchosen, disconnected. And because this fear feels so painful, many people spend their entire lives desperately attaching themselves to relationships, attention, validation, and social approval, just to avoid facing loneliness. Buddhism teaches that attachment often grows strongest where fear exists, and many people become emotionally attached to unhealthy relationships, toxic environments, and false identities, simply because they are terrified of being alone with themselves. This creates enormous suffering, because fear of loneliness causes people to betray themselves constantly. They tolerate disrespect, stay in painful relationships, beg for attention, ignore red flags, abandon their peace, all because they believe losing people would hurt more than losing themselves. But slowly, this fear destroys inner freedom. Most people never truly ask themselves an important question: why am I so afraid of being alone? Because the answer often reveals something deeper. Many people fear solitude because they are uncomfortable with their own inner world. Silence forces them to face emotions they constantly avoid: insecurity, emptiness, fear, unresolved pain. And instead of understanding these emotions consciously, they search for distractions through relationships, validation, noise, and emotional dependency. But external connection cannot permanently heal internal disconnection. This is why so many people still feel lonely even while surrounded by others. Because loneliness is not always the absence of people. Sometimes loneliness is the absence of connection with yourself. Buddhism teaches that peace begins when you stop escaping your inner world and start understanding it consciously. But most people avoid solitude because solitude removes distraction. When the noise disappears, the mind becomes louder. Unresolved emotions appear. Fear appears. Overthinking appears. And many people immediately run back towards stimulation because they do not know how to sit peacefully with themselves. But avoiding solitude only strengthens emotional dependency. The more uncomfortable you become with being alone, the more desperate you become for external attachment. And desperation weakens clarity. Desperate people often accept unhealthy situations simply because they fear emptiness more than suffering. This is why emotionally dependent people become easier to manipulate. Manipulative people understand loneliness very well. They know attention can become emotional control. They know people starving for connection will tolerate behavior they normally should not tolerate. This is why fear of being alone becomes dangerous. It blinds people. A person terrified of loneliness may remain in relationships that destroy their peace, simply because silence feels scarier than suffering. But Buddhism teaches that solitude can become one of the greatest teachers in life, not because isolation magically solves all problems, but because solitude creates awareness. When you spend time alone consciously, without constantly escaping into distraction, you begin meeting yourself honestly. You begin understanding your fears, emotional patterns, insecurities, and attachments more clearly. And this awareness changes everything. Most people know everyone else except themselves. They know what society expects, what other people want, what gains approval, but they rarely stop long enough to ask, what does my own soul actually need? Solitude helps reveal this. Because without external noise constantly influencing the mind, your inner voice becomes easier to hear. And this creates emotional clarity. Many people are emotionally exhausted because they constantly shape themselves around other people's expectations. They adapt endlessly to avoid rejection. They become whoever gains acceptance, and after years of this, they lose all connection with who they truly are. But solitude reconnects you with yourself. This is why conscious solitude feels different from loneliness. Loneliness says, I am incomplete without someone. Conscious solitude says, I am learning how to exist peacefully within myself. This difference changes everything internally. Most people chase relationships because they want someone else to save them emotionally. But Buddhism teaches that no relationship can permanently heal a mind disconnected from itself. If you cannot sit peacefully with yourself, no amount of external attention will fully satisfy you, because the emptiness is internal. And internal emptiness requires awareness, not endless distraction. Many people also confuse being alone with being unloved, but they are not the same thing. A person can be alone temporarily while deeply connected to themselves internally, and a person can be surrounded by people while feeling deeply disconnected inside. This is why inner connection matters so much. The more deeply you understand yourself, the less terrifying solitude becomes. You stop needing constant noise to survive emotionally. You stop panicking every time life becomes quiet. You stop desperately chasing people to avoid facing yourself. And slowly, your relationship with solitude changes. It becomes peaceful instead of frightening. This creates enormous emotional freedom, because the moment you stop fearing being alone, people lose much of their emotional power over you. You stop tolerating disrespect simply to avoid loneliness. You stop begging for attention from emotionally unavailable people. You stop sacrificing your peace for temporary connection, because your fear no longer controls your decisions. This is real inner strength. Many people remain trapped in unhealthy emotional cycles because fear of abandonment controls them. They constantly need reassurance, validation, and attention, because they never learned how to emotionally support themselves internally. But Buddhism teaches self-awareness instead of emotional dependency. The more conscious you become, the more emotionally stable you become within your own presence. This changes relationships completely. You stop needing people to constantly complete you emotionally. Instead, relationships become healthier because they are built from wholeness instead of desperation. There is a huge difference between love and emotional dependency. Love allows freedom. Dependency creates fear. Fear of loss, fear of abandonment, fear of being alone, and fear slowly destroys peace. But conscious solitude weakens fear. The more peacefully you learn how to exist with yourself, the less emotional panic controls your life. You stop viewing solitude as punishment. You begin seeing it as space for awareness, space for healing, space for reflection, space for reconnecting with your soul. Most people never give themselves this space. Their life becomes non-stop stimulation because stillness feels uncomfortable. But constant distraction prevents deep self-understanding. And without self-understanding, emotional suffering continues repeating. This is why mindfulness matters so deeply in Buddhism. Mindfulness brings awareness back inward, back to your breath, your thoughts, your emotions, your consciousness. And slowly, you begin realizing something powerful. You are capable of surviving your own presence. This realization changes your entire nervous system, because the fear of being alone weakens. And when fear weakens, emotional freedom grows. Most people do not realize how many of their decisions are secretly controlled by loneliness. They stay in draining friendships because they fear having nobody. Stay in toxic relationships because they fear emptiness. Stay connected to people who constantly disrespect them because temporary attention feels emotionally safer than solitude. But Buddhism teaches that attachment without awareness creates suffering. And awareness eventually reveals an important truth. Being alone peacefully is healthier than constantly betraying yourself for connection. This realization changes your standards completely. You stop chasing relationships at any cost. You stop begging for emotional crumbs. You stop allowing loneliness to lower your self-respect, because your relationship with yourself becomes stronger. And this creates emotional independence. Emotionally independent people are not cold or heartless. They still love deeply, still care deeply, still appreciate connection, but they no longer lose themselves completely inside relationships. They no longer depend entirely on others for emotional survival. This creates calmness. Many people think emotional independence means isolation, but Buddhism teaches balance. Humans naturally desire connection, love, and companionship. The problem begins when connection becomes emotional addiction instead of conscious love. The more attached people become, the more fear controls them. Fear of losing, fear of rejection, fear of abandonment. And because fear controls them, peace disappears. But self-awareness softens attachment. You begin understanding that your worth does not disappear when you are alone. Your value does not decrease because someone leaves. Your existence is not meaningless without constant validation. And this understanding creates enormous inner stability. Most people search everywhere outside themselves for peace because they fear what exists inside themselves. But peace cannot fully grow while you are constantly running from your own inner world. This is why solitude becomes sacred in Buddhism, not because isolation is superior to human connection, but because solitude teaches you how to reconnect with yourself without distraction. And once this connection strengthens, life changes completely. You stop feeling emotionally desperate all the time. You stop needing constant reassurance. You stop fearing silence. Because your own presence begins feeling safe instead of threatening. This is real healing. Not becoming emotionally numb. Not rejecting people. But finally, learning how to exist peacefully within yourself. And eventually, something beautiful begins happening. You stop choosing relationships from fear. You stop begging to be chosen. You stop sacrificing your peace just to avoid loneliness. And instead of desperately needing the world to constantly fill the emptiness inside you, you begin creating peace from within. This is real freedom, because the moment you no longer fear being alone, you become much harder for the world to control, and the more peaceful you become within your own presence, the more honestly, calmly, and consciously you finally begin living. Conclusion. The more you know yourself, the less power the world has over you, because people can only truly control the parts of you that remain unconscious. Your fears, your insecurities, your emotional wounds, your desperate need for approval, your attachment to validation, your fear of being alone, your inability to sit peacefully with yourself. But the moment awareness enters your life, something powerful begins changing inside you. You stop reacting blindly. You stop abandoning yourself for acceptance. You stop allowing fear to control every decision. You stop searching for your worth in the hands of other people. And slowly, your mind becomes calmer, clearer, and stronger. Buddhism teaches that true freedom is not found through controlling the outside world. It is found through understanding the inner world. Because once you deeply understand your own mind, manipulation loses power. Fear loses power. Emotional dependency loses power. You begin realizing that peace was never something the world could permanently give you, and because of this, the world also cannot permanently take it away from you. Most people spend their whole life trying to become accepted by everyone while remaining strangers to themselves. They chase validation, attention, and emotional security without realizing that the real source of suffering was always unconscious attachment. But self-awareness changes everything. The more conscious you become, the less desperate you become. The less desperate you become, the more peaceful your life becomes. And the more peaceful your life becomes, the harder it becomes for anyone to emotionally control you anymore. Because a person who truly understands themselves no longer needs to constantly prove their worth to the world. They no longer panic every time life changes. They no longer lose themselves trying to keep everyone happy. Instead, they become emotionally grounded within themselves. Calm during chaos. Present during uncertainty, aware during emotional storms, and peaceful without needing constant validation from the outside world. This is real inner power. Not ego, not dominance, not control over others, but mastery over your own mind. And the moment you begin mastering your own mind, your entire life begins changing from within.